There was an idea.
Dormammu, I come to bargain.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
Bunch of jackasses standing in a circle.
Baskin Robbins always finds out.
Higher, further, faster, baby.
Are you Tony Stank?
I am Iron Man. Assemble.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Assembly Required, an MCU Retrospective, the show where we reassemble the MCU piece by piece, movie by movie, and now episode by episode. I am your host, Eduardo. What a fun ride it has been. We are back together again, ready to talk all about Daredevil in its in its glory. And I have assembled a blind battalion of bros to talk all about Daredevil with me. Suddenly you've all lost your eyesight. I've got Robbie, Chris, and Peaches here. What's going on, guys?
Do we have to do this one with our eyes closed?
Yes.
Why are we even in this Discord call then?
You didn't memorize the notes?
Well, there are certain times where Matt Murdock takes off it, like he's like laying in the dumpster at the beginning of episode 2 and he takes off his mask. Why did he do that?
Right?
Did he need to see better?
I mean, it's probably warm under there. His eyes probably were warm.
I think
Speaking
it's just
as
because
someone who wears a mask a lot more than I ever thought I would, sometimes you just want to take it off for...
I just think Matt Murdock doesn't let people tell him what to do, and he takes off the mask to express his freedom as an individual.
That's true.
Point. I didn't think about that.
Oh boy.
I mean, when you think about it, his mask is BS and isn't doing anything.
And he does work with a Karen.
Assembly Required officially endorses wearing a mask, everyone. I just feel like I should throw
And
that
it goes over your nose.
Yes.
And your mouth. Why does that have to be said?
Yeah. Not your eyes, unless you're Daredevil.
Does his mask in COVID just cover his whole head?
Yeah.
like if Daredevil's out in a pandemic right now, just something over. Like
He's wearing a ski mask, but he's wearing it backwards.
Why isn't there like an Instagram, or maybe there is, or a Snapchat filter that puts surgical masks over people? And we could have watched Daredevil through the lens of the Instagram filter and just watched him wear double masks everywhere.
Double mask.
Someone invent this, please. Or point it out to us.
Well, before we start the show, there is some Marvel news that I think we need to cover on this show. I think it's important that we do. Unfortunately, due to a pretty closed under wraps 4-year battle with colon cancer, Chadwick Boseman left us earlier this week. He passed on, and it's absolutely devastating. It is. He was one of those actors that just sort of, you could tell he was a good person, and not just by the roles that he plays, but by his actions, by the things that he did. And if you go and look up any interview and you put it under the lens of him battling cancer during those interviews, you'll find a whole new respect for him. There was a whole interview that I saw that he did talking about Black Panther, and during that, all he could care about were a couple of kids that were not able to see Black Panther because they lost their lives to cancer. And it's incredible for somebody to, while they're making this franchise that's clearly making them a star, to be focusing on something like that instead. Is, you can tell he was special, and he will be missed. And you know, he's always gonna be immortal in our eyes.
Well said.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys. This one hit me so hard.
Yep.
Celebrity deaths don't always. And this one, I was knocked out for the rest of the night. Really. Just, I couldn't think about anything else. Watching some of those interviews, the one you mentioned, Eduardo, where he's talking about the kids who passed on from cancer, and he gets very emotional in that interview, and knowing now what we didn't know then, what he was going through. And same thing when you see pictures of him visiting St. Jude's and other children's hospitals, and to know that he can empathize with those children in a way that most people can't. I mean, it really, and it changes your perspective. And he was such a thoughtful actor. If you haven't seen it, I sent it to the guys earlier. I highly recommend you read Ryan Coogler's statement. Ryan Coogler, the director of Black Panther. He wrote a really long letter, I guess you could call it, talking about his relationship with Chadwick Boseman. And, he was cast by the Russos for Civil War, and he said, I inherited the casting of Chadwick Boseman, and it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. And he talks about the long conversations they had, and sometimes you don't realize how much an actor contributes to their film. Like, he was the one who said that the Wakandans had to dance during the coronation scene. He said, if they just stand there with spears, what separates them from Romans? And this is the one that blew my mind. The line that we talked about for so long in our Black Panther episode about, bury me at sea with my brothers who knew it was better to die than live in bondage. That was his idea. The original early draft of the script, Killmonger asked to be buried in Wakanda, and Chadwick Boseman said, what if he has to be buried somewhere else? And that's what got that going. So the contributions he made to that entire film, not just through his incredible performance as that character, he just exuded a regal sense in everything he did. And some of the legends that he's played beyond T'Challa. I mean, we talked so much about Jackie Robinson in our last episode. I don't think we even brought up the fact that Chadwick Boseman played him in 42
and lost his life on Jackie Robinson Day.
Yes, lost his life on Jackie Robinson Day, as we discussed Jackie Robinson Day last week. And here's something sad that I didn't realize: Jackie Robinson's widow is still alive.
Yes,
and she's outlived now both Jackie Robinson and the much younger actor who played him. I saw some pictures of them together, and I don't know, it just seemed like there was a lot of love there too. I feel one thing I wrote down while watching these Daredevil episodes is, hey, they quote Thurgood Marshall, who he also played. It's just such a loss for how much he meant to so many people. I mean, if he meant this much to us, and we talked about Black Panther, its cultural reach beyond, especially in the Black community, and he had such a career ahead of him. He had directing in his future. He had awards in his future. But even with his career cut tragically short, he's made an impact that will last generations.
So let's get into this episode. We're talking about Daredevil today, guys. And Robbie, hit us up with some Daredevil character background.
Yeah, I don't know how not to make this transition sudden. So, the history of Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but Daredevil's foundations were in 1964, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Which it's crazy to me how much in 1963 and 64, how many famous characters the two of them introduced to the world. Just like almost everyone we've discussed on this podcast was created by Stan Lee and his artists in 1963 and 64. Kirby did not, by the way, do the original art for, or didn't do the first, the art on the first series in Daredevil, but he did design the character and did the first cover. But Stan Lee did the writing. The Daredevil is the Man Without Fear. He is Matt Murdock. And when Matt Murdock was a young boy, he pushed a blind man out of the way of an oncoming truck. The truck crashed, spilled chemicals out. The chemicals hit young Matt Murdock and blinded him. But at the same time that it blinded him, they heightened his other senses. So Daredevil is blind, but able to basically see with a radar sense. Great hearing, great smell, great sense of touch. So he's able to do crazy things despite not having vision. And in his day job, he is also a hero. He is an attorney, a defense attorney working with Murdock and Nelson, or Nelson and Murdock, working with his friend Foggy Nelson. The two of them represent innocent people. Matt Murdock uses his ability to sense people's heart rate to tell whether or not they're truly innocent. Basically, gives them human lie detector tests and represents those who need it. There are some important people that are kind of going to show up, and so I bring them up quickly because they're going to start showing up in this series. Some recurring characters in the Daredevil circle. There's his secretary, Karen Page, and a lot of Karen Page's history is a sort of a love triangle. She was Matt Murdock's girlfriend for a long time. She was also Foggy Nelson's girlfriend for some time, and also their longtime secretary. His original nemesis was the financier and investor Leland Owsley, who becomes the Owl, which is a supervillain, which his power is that he ingests a serum that gives him the ability to float temporarily. And then he puts razor talons on his fingers to become...
I can temporarily float.
And so he's a
great ghost at Halloween parties.
Yeah, basically he's a corrupt Wall Street dude who ends up just becoming a crime boss. But a crime boss with the theme, he really leans into the Owsley part and becomes the Owl. I'm
thinking of the actor that plays Leland,
right,
just like
right.
floating now. I cannot imagine it.
Talons attached to his fingers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of overlap between Daredevil and Spider-Man. The two end up working together a lot, especially in the 60s and 70s. And as a result, there's also a lot of overlap between their villains. So Owsley was originally the Owl was originally a Daredevil villain, spent a lot of time as Daredevil's kind of first nemesis. And obviously Leland Owsley is in this show, as we'll get to. But the Owl is also very recognized as a Spider-Man villain. Spent a lot of time with Spider-Man as well. In the 70s,
less interesting Vulture.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
he can turn his head almost all the way.
You know, my first awareness of the Owl was they had a Spider-Man video game for the Super Nintendo, which was based on the animated series. But that game is just chock full of tons and tons and tons of villains, and one of them is the Owl. And I remember that was my first experience with the Owl, and my reaction was just, wait, why does this exist when Vulture exists? Because it's actually a Daredevil villain. In the 70s, they introduced... Yeah, in the 70s, they introduced one of the most popular Daredevil villains, which was Bullseye. Bullseye is basically an assassin that does not miss. Sounds boring, but he's actually cool. Daredevil's original costume was yellow and red. That only lasted for a year, but it was made from the robes of his father. His father was a boxer who was supposed to throw a fight to make money and refused because Matt, his son, was watching and he wanted to make him proud. So he refused, and then the gangsters that rigged the fight shot him. So Matt took his father's robe, yellow and red robe, and made a costume out of it, which that yellow and red robe is seen in the show as a nice Easter egg. Within a year, though, he transitioned to the Daredevil costume we all know and love. Let's see. From 1871 to 1875, the Daredevil comics started in 1971 to 1975, not 1871. The Daredevil comic was actually called...
Marvel's first superhero.
Was actually Daredevil and Black Widow for a long time. For 5 years, he shared billing with Black Widow, and they were basically a buddy superhero team. And that's actually my original awareness of Black Widow, was reading old Daredevil comics. I read some Avengers, and for some reason I have no memory of Black Widow in the Avengers. But I remember her as being... I thought she was Daredevil's sidekick, and then I found out there was more to Black Widow. But yeah. So Daredevil was originally very popular, then started to decline in popularity in the 70s, and they hired a new artist named Frank Miller to start doing the art for Daredevil. Frank Miller, of course, would go on to be extremely famous, doing Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, 300, Sin City. But he started with Daredevil. Well, he started elsewhere, but Daredevil was like his first big publication. Within a few years, Frank Miller convinced Marvel to make him the author of Daredevil as well, and that was when Daredevil experienced a resurgence in popularity. And that's kind of the high water mark of Daredevil. Is it was a very, very important and influential comic in the 80s, largely because of Frank Miller. Now, you'll be shocked to know that Frank Miller's take on Daredevil was extremely gritty and cynical. And I think it's very interesting. I would say maybe cynical to a fault, and the fictional adaptations of Frank Miller's work in like the Batman adaptations and this Daredevil adaptation aren't as cynical as Frank Miller, but they're clearly very, very inspired. The Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy is clearly inspired by Frank Miller, and this series is also very inspired by Frank Miller, and yet kind of eschews some of his darker tendencies at the same time.
The comic is grittier than the show?
Oh, way, way, way grittier. Way grittier.
The show is like maximum grit.
No. So I'll give you one example. He retconned a lot of things in Daredevil's life. And one of them was the origin story of Daredevil's father, or the background of Daredevil's father, Matt Murdock's father, Jack. Frank Miller made it so that he was an abusive father, that he was violent towards Matt, and really kind of, and got what he was coming to him when he was killed, which is just kind of unnecessary.
That's just too much.
Yeah. And then he just made Daredevil very, as Frank Miller likes to do, he made him an anti-hero, but kind of an anti-hero who with barely redeeming values. So sort of I would say the show is more violent than Frank Miller could get away with in a comic book, but it's also more hopeful and uplifting than Frank Miller ever likes to be.
It is strange to imagine taking Daredevil, who is a superhero and a lawyer, and making him an anti-hero.
Yes, correct.
It also makes sense because as watching this several times, I was like, this is like incredibly Batman adjacent.
Oh yeah. Yes. That's
It makes sense now, doesn't it?
You mean the part? Sorry to skip way ahead, where he's holding the Russian dude over the building and going,
Yes.
"Where is she?"
And I remember when I was watching this series, I was thinking there needs to be a Batman series that is this. Like, this is what we need. We need a Batman that's this, but I'm sure we'll bring that up again. A couple big important changes that Frank Miller made, or introductions he made. He took the Spider-Man villain, the Kingpin, and basically turned him into Daredevil's top adversary. So Kingpin had already been around for a couple decades when he was introduced into Daredevil Circle, but then he became basically Daredevil's arch nemesis, which is, it's very interesting that Kingpin is primarily a Spider-Man villain and yet is Daredevil's primary villain. He just fits very, very well with Daredevil, which I've always thought is extremely interesting. He also introduced in the 80s, he wanted there to be ninjas in the Daredevil comics, so he put ninjas in the Daredevil comics. He introduced a mentor for Daredevil, for Matt Murdock, named Stick, who was from the Chase, which is a clan of secret ninjas. So Daredevil's fighting skills became martial arts, and then their adversaries were the evil mystical ninja group, The Hand, led by the immortal Nobu Yoshioka. And that was a major part of the Daredevil comics. And as we will probably discuss in more detail in a future episode, all of that stuff right there, all of that inspired Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the Foot Clan. And literally in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as a side note, the origin story of the Ninja Turtles is the goo that hits Matt Murdock and makes him blind. That's the mutagen that seeps into the sewers and creates the Ninja Turtles. The Mirage Ninja Turtles comics are supposed to be adjacent to Daredevil. Frank Miller also introduced Daredevil's short-lived girlfriend, Elektra, who was formerly a part of The Hand, then became an assassin, and then was his girlfriend, and then was killed by Bullseye.
And then she got a movie.
And
no one saw it.
Correct. So after Miller left, Daredevil became more lighthearted. Despite his most popular depictions, Daredevil's kind of a lighthearted, witty character like Spider-Man usually. Not quite like Spider-Man, but that level of kind of wittiness. Frank Miller didn't like that. He has since been back to that. What's important about Daredevil is he has had an ongoing comic since 1964. A lot of the characters we've talked about in the show, they, other than Spider-Man, they tend to sometimes they get canceled, sometimes they fade. They've had multiple different runs with long droughts between them. Daredevil remains, and for a long time was. I think the MCU has kind of changed this, but before the films, Daredevil was one of the most popular comic book characters in the world. He was never an Avenger until 2011, and that's because, as we've discussed, the Avengers are mostly for kind of second-tier characters. Daredevil is now very well known for the Defenders. In the comics, Daredevil was not a Defender until they needed to fit the Defenders TV show. So Daredevil is a very recent member of the Defenders because he's always been able to carry his own comic. So it's very weird to me that as popular as Daredevil is, he's not had that much presence in other media. It's interesting that he didn't get a movie. He got this television series, a fantastic television series, but that's all. He got a movie in 2003 with Ben Affleck, which we're not going to talk about. We're just going to move on and pretend it didn't happen.
But to be fair, it did happen.
Yeah, it did happen.
And there's not a lot of early superhero movies.
Right.
So.
And I think that's, and I think you make a good point. I think that's a testament to Daredevil's popularity that movie happened when superhero movies weren't happening as often that time. And I'm guessing that movie is part of why it didn't happen again. I think that film kind of tainted the Daredevil waters, which is very unfortunate because I think it's an excellent
Even after that, they still made Elektra, which is like the spin-off movie, and that was even worse.
Yeah, so I'm pretty mad at that film because Daredevil's one of my favorite characters, and I think that kind of ruined things. Fortunately, this series is great, but it also makes me sad that the series is not part of the MCU. But so yeah, that's the Daredevil background.
Yeah, and this came about when Fox lost the rights after not using Daredevil, right? And I remember hearing reports that they were working on a reboot Daredevil movie that they just could not get off the ground. And I think at one point, and this might have just been rumor and speculation, Marvel Studios offered to Fox, "We'll extend your Daredevil if you give us Galactus."
That's interesting.
Yeah. All comes to Disney in the end.
Am I wrong if I'd rather have Daredevil than Galactus?
I don't think you're wrong, but
Galactus would be very hard to put into a movie,
right?
Even with like Dormammu having been introduced in Doctor Strange and like kind of cosmic entities existing, I feel like Galactus would be really difficult to pull off.
I mean, I've made it no secret that the only Fox properties that I actually cared about Marvel Studios getting their hands on were Galactus and the Silver Surfer and Doom.
Yeah, Doctor Doom's the one.
The Fantastic Four, I guess, come along with them, but it's Doom, Galactus, and the Silver Surfer.
MCU just handles
Silver Surfer is one of my favorite
well.
heroes.
Yeah, the MCU just handles villains so well. I constantly want to see how they handle Doctor Doom.
Yes, you didn't like how they got Gambit. He's got the cards.
The cards will tell.
What do? You throw them really hard?
What are you going to do if we're fighting Sentinels and we're not in the paper plate aisle of a Target?
If you guys haven't seen the X-Men, the Pete Holmes YouTube series, it is fantastic. The Gambit one's really good. The Wolverine one is really good.
Yeah.
We reference it like every episode somehow, so you should probably watch those.
Those and his Batman ones too.
Yes.
Yeah. The Batman.
Where are the other drugs going?
Xavier Fires the X-Men is what that series is called.
Yeah. Scary face.
So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the first two episodes.
I'm sorry, I had one more thing. A big change in Daredevil's backstory that just happened this week. If you have not read Daredevil Annual #1, go ahead and skip ahead by a minute. I wanted to share this, though. I just saw this today. So Matt Murdock, as part of his...
Mike Murdock.
No, that's a thing. Keep going.
That's a thing. And that's why Claire calls it Mike in the second episode. But Matt Murdock, as part of his cover story for his secret identity, he made up that he had a twin brother named Mike Murdock. So let me see if I can get this right. Okay. I don't know exactly what happened a few years ago. This article that I'm looking at doesn't explain it. It says, In an accident of superpowers a few years ago, a living, fully adult Mike Murdock was created with full awareness that he was an accidental human copy of a flimsy lie. This week, in the Daredevil Annual #1, Mike Murdock stole an Asgardian artifact and a book of magic, put them together, retroactively created his own life as his actual real-life twin brother who has existed for his entire life. And so there's a whole new backstory now where Mike was around for the accident where Matt went blind. And then Matt went off to college to get his law degree, and Mike stayed in the neighborhood and started hustling for supervillains. And his best friend and partner in crime is Wilson Fisk's son.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because comic books.
Also, for the record, the reason he had to create the Mike persona is because Spider-Man accidentally spilled his secret identity. Because Peter Parker is an incredibly intelligent idiot.
Yeah. Daredevil and Spider-Man work together a fair amount, right? Yeah, I mean, they're both New York City street
Right. It's the
guys.
whole street level thing. Even though, as we discussed, Spider-Man's power set is actually way beyond street level. He's written as street level.
Mm-hmm.
Daredevil is perfectly a street level character, so they just kind of combine.
Yeah.
Where were you guys first introduced to Daredevil?
Ben Affleck.
Yeah, I think that was the first time I was aware of him, and I never even saw that movie. So
got an action figure in probably the early 90s, maybe the late 80s of Daredevil that I thought was really cool, and it turned me on to the character.
Did it now? For me, I feel like I bring this up every episode, and I'm just starting to realize how much this shaped my childhood. But I first learned about Daredevil in the Spider-Man animated series.
That's fantastic,
because he was a part of the Spider-Man animated series.
And I can relate every time you say it, so...
I didn't start liking him until Marvel Avengers Alliance. If you want to bring up another thing, I bring up it.
Yes.
All right, so today we're going to be discussing the first 2 episodes, Into the Ring and Cutman. They're both written by Drew Goddard and directed by Phil Abraham.
Drew Goddard, by the way, he's great. He was co-writer and director of Cabin in the Woods.
Oh.
Which is my favorite horror movie, probably.
Same.
He was a writer on Angel and maybe Buffy, but definitely Angel, which is why he co-wrote Cabin in the Woods with Joss Whedon. Producer and directed a few episodes of The Good Place as well. And I believe he directed Cloverfield too.
Oh wow!
Not Cloverfield 2, Cloverfield, 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Electric Boogaloo.
Cloverfield with the giant monster. The really, really good one. But yeah,
John
I was
Goodman?
very excited when I heard that he was... No, that's the second one. He wrote on Alias and Lost as well. But yeah, I remember being pretty excited when I heard that he was going to be involved with Daredevil.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was also supposed to be directing the Sinister Six movie that never happened. So,
well, I'm sure he would have done his best.
One day.
I'm sorry, he wrote Cloverfield. He didn't direct it.
We'll get a Sinister Six one day.
I thought we already got that in the Spider-Man PS4 game, so I'm all set.
Right, which was the best Spider-Man movie. I said it already.
All right, I'm sorry.
No, that's good stuff.
I know that's the earliest I've ever interrupted you. You got 2 words in.
Technically, you interrupted me earlier, but that's okay. Start off with episode 1 synopsis. A man walking down a New York street finds a traffic accident and is horrified to see his young son Matty injured, laying in the middle of the wreckage. As the man attends to his screaming son, a stranger indicates Matty pushed him out of the way of an oncoming car, saving the man's life. Nearby barrels of toxic chemicals have been dumped on Matty's face while his father tries to wipe his eyes. Matty Murdock loses his vision. After the flashback, Matt Murdock sits down to confession with a priest. Murdock tells the story of his father, who was a boxer who could take a punch without being fazed. He explains his father would sometimes go into a fit of rage and pummel his opponent. He calls it letting the devil out. He says he didn't understand at the time, but now he does. When the priest asks Matt Murdock what he is confessing for, Murdock says it's not about for anything he's done, but for what he's about to do. Now, Chris, we're going to start with you very early.
Okay, yeah.
We bring it into confessional here, but there is, and since this is your first real time viewing the show, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Matt Murdock's faith is sort of a theme throughout the entire series. And they put it on display here right at the very beginning. I think this was like a central thing to the comic character as well, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Primarily once Frank Miller took over, yes.
Yeah, you want a superhero, you want shorthand for a superhero wrecked with guilt, you make him Catholic. I mean, that's, I speak from experience, not as a superhero.
Dox yourself.
Whoops. No.
Wait, you're the Sound Lord with the cape?
That's. I knew I shouldn't have used my superhero name as my fun podcast nickname. Dang it. Yeah. Actually, before I get into the deep stuff, I want to say I thought this particular scene actually feels a little contrived as a way of like, we need a monologue, we need to show that he's Catholic, and share his backstory. And first of all, the priest was kind of not very understanding, which is not what you want when you go to confession, because that's already not fun. You don't want a priest going, "Yeah, get to the point. What's your sin?" That's not great. But also, I feel like it should have, instead of him being, "What are you confessing?" "Oh, I haven't done it yet." I feel like, and maybe this would have been a little cliche too, but at least it would have felt a little more natural if, "What are you confessing?" Flashback to the night before when he does his beat up thing, because the guy says he.
I'll tell you, even on rewatch, I thought that's what it did. I swear.
Yeah,
that's
it would have
what
made more sense.
It could have worked that way, yeah.
Because he starts off by saying that he hasn't been to confession in a long time, and then says, "But I haven't done it yet." It's like, okay, well, surely you haven't forgotten how confession works that much that you're not like, "I'm going to go beat up some guys tonight, Father, please forgive me." But I digress. That's not super important. That just kind of distracted me a little bit. And I don't think it distracted me because of the Catholic thing as much as it was like, oh, it feels like a little bit clumsy writing. But let me get down to my notes. I think it is very interesting as a Catholic myself to see how Matt Murdock's faith and upbringing are foregrounded in these episodes. I think even you talk to anyone who either is a practicing Catholic or just grew up Catholic, that is something that stays with you no matter what your what your relationship with the church is. And we're introduced to him in a confessional. I mean, that's about as Catholic as it gets. And there's an exchange later in the second episode when he's talking to Claire and she's listing off the strange things about him, and she says, "You can take an unbelievable amount of punishment without one damn complaint." And he goes, "Oh, that last one's Catholicism." There's a reason that Catholic guilt is an expression. I don't know what it is. I couldn't tell you why it is that we just
you haven't beat up enough people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see going forward, and just as a sudden, if we haven't explained everything, this is my first time watching this series. Everyone else has watched it before. I actually watched like the first 3 episodes a few years ago, and I'm just usually really bad about watching TV shows, so I never finished the first season. So I'm mostly going into this not having seen it, having a general idea of what's happened. I didn't want to say that, but yes, I'm going to do it.
No, it's right there.
I didn't even think of it.
He couldn't see it. He was blind. He couldn't see it.
Yeah, I missed it. But I think it's going to be really interesting. I mean, his methods, as we especially see in the second episode, are the kind of thing that I think anyone would feel guilty about. Going through. So if you're going out and brutally beating up and torturing people every night, even if you're doing it for the greater good, that's going to weigh on you. And I think it's going to be really interesting, to see the psychology of a religious man who tries to do what he thinks is best for society, but does so in a violent, arguably too violent way. And then he goes and dresses up. Well, I assume he eventually will get the costume, and be named Daredevil. Yeah, but
Spoiler.
I mean, the devil is right there in his name, and I feel like calling yourself any kind of devil, if that's not the most Catholic guilt thing ever, I mean, I don't know what is. So yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting seeing going forward that it's going to be such a big part of his character. And I also think that, people don't like to talk about religion. It's one of those things that it's like a taboo subject, like politics, because it's a very personal thing for a lot of people. And you see it portrayed in media in different ways, and I think it's going to be interesting just saying like, okay, this is what he believes, and it's not going to be a discussion of, oh, is he right to, it's not going to be about religion so much as it's about how does this facet of his life, I mean, with a name like Matt Murdock, he's a good Irish boy, it stands to reason that would be a big part of it, a big part of his character and what forms, his outlook on life. And I think it's going to be interesting. Is it interesting, people who've watched it?
Let me tell you, you will just be very, very, very interested.
Okay, excellent.
Especially in future seasons, but even in this season. And all I have to add is, especially for people listening, I've been excited to rewatch this. I've been excited to talk about it with these guys, but mostly I'm just really excited to get Soundlord's reactions to this show, knowing that he is going in blind. And I was already excited for that, and then I was rewatching, and that Catholic line, that's the Catholicism, that line that he brought up, that also made me realize there was another factor of why I was really interested to listen to him discuss this. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a Catholic church in the and an angel in the opening credits.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty central. So I'm excited for your reactions to the show, to just the superhero show. I'm excited to your reactions to these things that I've already seen and know, but also I hadn't thought about the Catholic angle until last night, and I had written down this line because I wanted to see, before this episode, I wanted to see if you would want to talk about it. And then you had already written it down yourself in the group notes, and I realized, oh, he's going to talk about it. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I have in my back pocket a pitch for if I'm ever an important writer someday, for a Daredevil Nightcrawler team up, because they're both Catholic superheroes, who either by choice or by birth have demonic imagery associated with them. But they're both also, I mean, as you said in the comics, Daredevil's kind of more of a, when he's not being grim and gritty, he's kind of a lighthearted one. And Nightcrawler also has sort of that swashbuckling nature to him, but also a darker side as well.
It would also probably make sense that Nightcrawler and him get along, because Matt Murdock can't see what Nightcrawler looks like, and so he can't judge him immediately based off of sight, so he probably gets like a better interaction with him.
But he'd smell him coming because his teleportation has a sulfur smell, so he'd like know he's coming before he gets there because he'd smell him ahead of time. I've thought about this.
I played also that Daredevil action figure I had. I also had a Nightcrawler action figure, and those two action figures played together in the front yard a lot.
Chris, you're talking about your first watch through of this, and to be 100% honest, I feel like it's my second first watch through because I don't remember anything. I'm watching this show, and I remember the characters. I sort of remember some of their interactions, but I couldn't tell you what happens in this season, so your guess is as good as mine. We're going to be watching this together, basically like new almost.
Oh, yeah.
So in a quiet stretch of shipping containers, Turk Barrett and a group of Russian thugs throw a group of young, screaming women in a container. Turk explains he's getting $1,000 for each of them, which I thought was a little low.
Yeah, right? God.
If I was going to be some sort of in that field, not saying I literally ever would, $1,000 a person is not, to me, worth that. But maybe that's just to show how crappy these guys are.
Yeah.
Before the container can be closed, Murdoch, now dressed in black with a black cowl covering his head and eyes, drops down and brutally beats the thugs. Murdoch releases the women, and when Turk tries to pull a gun on them, he shows his heightened ability to locate sounds, move before the gun can be fired, and beats Barrett to a pulp. In the morning, Murdoch is woken up by his friend, Foggy Nelson, or that one kid from the Mighty Ducks. The two are meeting with a real estate agent.
Okay.
To purchase an office.
The first two episodes trying to figure that out.
To purchase an office where they can start their new legal defense firm, Nelson and Murdoch. Bailey also said that he's from The Butterfly Effect, so maybe if you've seen that movie, you also know him from there.
The first one?
There's more than one Butterfly Effect?
Yes. And
because when one happens, then another ripple happens,
There's
and then you find
there's
a
at least
raccoon in a
3,
cupboard
I
in a
think.
bathroom upstairs, and then you have to fight off Yetis in the mountains. There's a lot that goes into that.
There's at least 3, I think, but they're not actually closely connected to the first one.
Oh, well, I have no idea. The agent explains rent is currently cheap after the incident. The Chitauri invasion and the Battle of New York has driven down prices. The two take the office, though express disagreement over Murdoch's decision to take only those who are actually innocent. Now, Robbie, the incident.
Yeah, what? No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Watching this now, in hindsight, as we do this retrospective of the MCU, is very interesting because it takes me back to a time when the Chitauri invasion was the event of the MCU. It was like the only big event, and everything referenced it. And you remember Iron Man 3, how big a deal it was in Iron Man 3, and how much of what happened in Phase 2 was reacting to the incident, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. reacted to the incident, and it took a while, but Homecoming, started with this. And these Netflix shows early on, also, it was very much about, and this show, and this is not a spoiler for Soundlord, this season is absolutely going to be a lot about the reverberations of aliens appeared and superheroes beat them in the middle of New York. And it's just interesting. It's also interesting how this movie is like, we're in the MCU, but we're going to kind of stay arm's reach because they call it the incident. It reminds me of Jessica Jones, how she doesn't reference, she doesn't actually say Captain America. She says the flag waver. And so it hits on 2 levels, which both feel weird now. There's the part where it's like kind of the MCU, but kind of not. And that, of course, now it is just straight not, which is depressing.
Have they officially said that it's not, though?
I don't think there's been any official. I don't think it's officially not canon. It's just we're never doing anything with this, and it's over, and we might reboot these characters if we feel like.
It would be great if they didn't reboot them. If
they've all already been
wasn't
handled
there
well.
some speculation that Matt Murdock might be showing up in Spider-Man 3?
I wouldn't say all of them have been handled well, but go on.
You're right. Not all of them have been handled well. You're right.
You mean One Punch Man?
I do mean One Punch Man.
Yeah, you're right. They
Have you guys actually seen One Punch Man?
No, I'm just aware of it.
Okay, so I have seen One Punch Man, and it is the most outrageous anime of all time because he literally just doesn't lose.
Look, I only know about anime through JoJo memes, and I was under the impression that was the most outrageous anime.
No, you're correct. JoJo is the most outrageous anime, and I think it's on its own level. But way down here below it, on the second level, then there's that One Punch Man.
Like, my entire knowledge of anime comes from our friend Ramon posting memes. And that's like...
I think he listens, so...
Can relate.
Oh, shout out, Ramon.
And Chris, have you seen Daredevil? Or I'm sorry, have you seen Jessica Jones?
No, I have not really delved into the Netflix corner of the MCU.
Jessica Jones is also good.
Honestly, I think after because David Tennant was one of my favorite actors, so I really, really want to watch Jessica Jones, but I am a completionist, and I was like, I'll have to go back and watch Daredevil. And the thing was, I got so far behind, is like, this is so much work to get caught up now. And I saw Robbie make a face when I said I'm a completionist because he knows what that means. And how terrible that is, that I have 2 seasons of Iron Fist that I'm going to force myself to watch at some point.
Dude, I didn't even get to the second one. The first one was such a slog.
Like, I heard they don't even show the dragon, so, like, what's even the point?
Yeah, it's tough.
They don't do a lot of things.
And
He never dresses up as Iron Fist. Because I remember when they announced that they were building up to the Defenders, it's like, okay, you got Daredevil, who wears a crazy costume. And then you have Luke Cage, who does not. Who did at one point in the comics, but hasn't for years and years, right?
yes.
Jessica Jones, I don't think has ever
No,
worn
she
a
used to have a
costume.
costume. It's
Oh, did
very
she?
boring,
Okay.
and it's okay that we've moved on from it.
Wasn't it when she was Jewel?
Yes. Yes.
But then you had so those three characters at least, yeah. Luke Cage, I mean, they all have superpowers of some kind, but they're not like outrageous superpowers. And then you have the Iron Fist, and it's like, oh, that's going to be so wild having Iron Fist. And then, all accounts, it was not so wild.
And he's got an iconic costume with an iconic look, like whatever.
Man, you don't even know. I don't want us to have to watch Iron Fist for this podcast.
I'm not gonna do it
because I think everybody, all the listeners, would drop out for however many episodes. But I kind of want you to watch it for Schadenfreude.
Yeah. Well, I'll get back to you on that. But like I don't know. It's just kind of a bummer that you take a character like Iron Fist and you don't put him in his costume. You never get around to doing Heroes for Hire when you got Luke Cage right there.
Right. And so you didn't watch The Defenders either, right?
No.
It is good. It's worth watching. It's only 8 episodes, so you'll get through it fast. Also, it's not super important that you watch everything, although Daredevil Season 2 does have a lot of influence on it.
Yeah.
But I ask all that to say that The Defenders is good, and yet every sequence that Iron Fist is in is miserable. Like,
really?
It's just... It's such a bad character, and it's played so poorly. And so much of The Defenders is... It's literally this mopey, ultra-serious dude surrounded by but it's not played for laughs. He's just played straight, ultra-serious, with literally this girl following him around all the time, telling everyone else how great he is. Like, he has to be serious. You just don't understand. He's the Iron Fist. It's so bad.
Yeah. And I remember that the showrunner for Iron Fist also did the Inhumans show, which I also never watched, which I also heard was really bad. And then they finally decided to stop using that guy. Maybe he's a good showrunner for other things, but it sounds like he and Marvel were just not a fit.
Nope.
I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone's talent. But yeah. Yeah, it's just kind of a bummer. And Robbie, do you ever wish that instead they had done the actual Defenders from the comics? So you had Doctor Strange and Silver Surfer and Hulk
and Hulk. Yeah, I like that there was. I think I would have liked a hybrid. I think I would have liked if they put these characters with those characters. Mm-hmm. But yes, I would like to see the Hulk, Doctor Strange, Defenders.
Yeah.
But yeah. The Chitauri invasion. It's weird going back and
I forgot what we were talking about. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I remind myself. No, that was fun.
No, you're fine. And Chris, I personally like. I think my favorite season of all the Netflix shows is season 1 of Jessica Jones, and it's because David Tennant is so good in it.
Yeah.
He's like God, I'm forgetting Loki's actor's name. Good.
Tom Hiddleston?
He's Tom Hiddleston steals the show kind of good. Yeah. He's
I
very,
think
very
he's
good
the
at
best
that
of the Netflix villains.
Is that what comes after chronologically after Daredevil season 1? Is it
yes,
then Jessica Jones?
Then Jessica Jones.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of overlap, but it's not important. But like Jessica Jones has some Nelson and Murdoch stuff in there.
Okay.
But yeah.
And like I know Luke Cage is in Jessica Jones, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And obviously Rosario Dawson is in everything. She's
Bless.
Coulson of their universe.
Yeah, I think if you are going to go the completionist route, you want to watch season 1 of all of them first, starting with Daredevil and then ending with Iron Fist, and then you go back to Daredevil season 2.
But I am going to tell you that you don't need to worry about the completionist route.
Yeah, you should Wikipedia Iron Fist.
Okay.
So the Chitauri invasion.
Yeah.
Only the last thing I was going to say is it's just very interesting how it was such a big deal at one point in this franchise, and now it just kind of feels quaint. And so it's kind of interesting when they talk about the incident. Aliens came to Earth, and superheroes fought them. And it's like, when this show came out, yeah, that was the biggest thing that's ever happened in the universe. And now it's no.
Well, it's like Stan Lee's line in Infinity War. What, you've never seen a spaceship before?
Right.
I might have been under the false guise of the internet once again, but I thought that when these shows first debuted, they were like definitively part of the MCU, and then at some point they were like, nah, dog, like, we're not using these anymore. So that's why I thought it was like, oh, they're kind of blatantly talking about New York, and we should know that they're talking about New York because these two contents are related, but like they're not saying it, and it's kind of weird that they're not just saying it if they're supposed to be playing nice with each other.
Well, it's like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where it's produced by Marvel Television, which at this point in time was technically a separate entity from Marvel Studios.
Yeah.
And now it's all under the same banner, which is why we're getting these Disney Plus shows.
Even so, it's weird though, because like, say for some reason you hadn't watched the MCU, but you did watch the Netflix series. Maybe you have Netflix and you didn't want to spend more money, and you're like, I'll watch this Marvel stuff. What are they referring to then? If you haven't seen Avengers, it's kind of weird that they won't say it. Like,
well, they did say aliens came out of the sky and blew up a bunch of things. Like they spelled it out in like one or two throwaway lines and then moved on.
But
that's
still
what is weird to me, though.
Kind of slightly cute and distant about it.
Yeah, that's why it's weird, because it's an alien invasion.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, let's see in 3 years how we refer to this year. We might just call 2020 the incident by the time we're done with it, because we don't want to go into every single terrible thing that happened in it.
Or it'll be like the guy's name that we don't say. That we just don't say 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Voldemort?
No. Kingpin.
Oh, yeah. We don't say his name.
We don't say his name.
That kind of made me roll my eyes, too. It was like, we all know. The opening credits said Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk. Like, we know.
In an apartment elsewhere, a young woman is found by the police holding a bloody knife next to a dead man. As they arrest her, she screams that she didn't do it. Foggy's childhood friend and police sergeant, Brett Mahoney, tips Nelson off to the woman, Karen Page, in her case, indicating the DA has not yet pressed charges. Nelson and Murdoch meet with Karen and offer to represent her, having just passed the bar and looking for their first client. As someone who watched this with somebody who's about to take the bar, that was a very stressful,
I bet.
stressful sequence. Paige swears she's innocent, and Murdoch, able to hear her heartbeat, believes her. She tells them the dead man was Daniel Fisher, who worked with her at Union Allied Construction. She says they met at the bar for drinks, and she remembered nothing else until waking up next to his bloodied corpse. A man is standing alone on a park bench when another man in a suit sits next to him. The man in the suit tells the other, Mr. Farnham, that his employer recently acquired a massive debt owed by Farnham. Farnham insists he'll get the money, and the suited man shows Farnham a live video of his daughter along with a nearby hitman named Rance. He explains to Farnham they are not interested in the money he owes, but rather his position. Nelson and Murdoch argue over the Karen Page case. Foggy insists they should take a deal, since the evidence makes it an open and shut case. Murdoch convinces Nelson there is something further going on, since Page has yet been charged, and the story isn't in the papers. Nelson angrily agrees. As Karen Page sleeps in her jail cell, Farnham, a prison security guard, comes up behind her and attempts to strangle her. As he apologizes, Karen is able to break free and scream for help. Let me tell you, there's one way to get me to squirm in my seat, and this show has done it once an episode, and it's when you go for someone's eye.
Oh,
Yes.
no.
Correct.
Same.
And
Same.
I looked away because I knew it was coming when I was rewatching.
I forgot, and we were shocked. And ooh.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then they go ahead and do another eye thing in the next episode. I'm like, ah.
Oh, God.
Also, spoiler: they do it in that rate of once an episode continues on through at least 3 episodes.
We don't know that. This is blind. This science experiment is blind.
So
So
is
we're
the dude
there.
I just referenced.
Then he doesn't care about eye stuff. Maybe that's the point.
Ugh. The next day, Nelson and Murdoch meet with detectives Blake and Hoffman, demanding Paige's release since she is not being charged and is unsafe in prison. Though Blake threatens Murdoch, the two agree. Back in their office, Nelson and Murdoch question Karen as to why someone would try to kill her. Paige explains Union Allied Construction had been profiting as a leader in the massive rebuilding process following the Chitauri invasion. She tells the lawyer she was accidentally sent what appeared to be massive amounts of laundered money disguised as a pension and opened it. Karen approached Daniel Fisher about what she saw to look for help, but blacked out after a drink she assumed was drugged and woke up at Fisher's murder scene. A distraught Karen tells Nelson and Murdoch they can't help her and she won't be responsible for another death, but Murdoch is able to calm her down and get her to stay at his apartment for protection. Back at his apartment, Murdoch speculates Karen is only alive because she has something they want and asks if she kept the UAC pension fund file. Karen denies it, but her heartbeat tells Matt she's lying. The lie detest determined that was a lie.
I like his apartment. Here's a weird note. I think his apartment's cool. I don't need that sign blaring through the windows, but I like the windows in there. They look
Well,
cool.
he wouldn't be able to afford it without the signs.
No, I know, but
Well, isn't that the point?
I
Like,
just think the layout is
Yeah,
cool.
I think the
Well,
point is
sure.
it's a cool apartment.
yeah, I think like every hipster would like to live in that apartment
Yeah.
without the sign,
Yeah.
but not
Right.
every hipster
Or-
is blind. So
Yeah.
Or hipsters would want to live in it with the sign because of the sign. It's ironically bad.
I feel like I could deal with the sign, honestly.
For what I understand rent costs in New York, I think I would deal with the sign
Yeah.
without hesitation.
I might find something comforting about the glow of that sign.
Yeah.
You ever turn the TV on when you can't fall asleep?
Yes.
I used to until I watched The Ring, and now I don't sleep with the TV on in the room.
Oh. Yeah, see, I don't know. That's for me. If I it used to be if I couldn't fall asleep because my brain was doing too much, whether it was stressing about a real life or worrying about a scary movie I watched earlier because I am a chicken. I would turn on ESPN, turn the volume down low so I could not really hear it, and fall asleep to the Australian Open. I don't know. It's
As many do.
mm-hmm.
on top of a construction building, a group of shady characters meet. Leland Owlsley, Nobu Yoshioka, Madame Gao, and the Russian Renshankov brothers meet with the man in the suit previously seen in the park threatening Mr. Farnham, James Wesley. The group is angry Wesley's employer is unable to attend, and Wesley reminds them sternly not to say his employer's name. Wesley asks the Russians why their shipments are short a load, and the two explain how the masked men beat their thugs and help the captives escape. Owlsley claims a new hero is a good thing as heroes create profits for them. The group then presses Wesley on tying up the loose ends of Union Allied construction, and he insists they are handling it. Wesley impresses upon the Russians they have to handle the man in the mask. Who would like to talk about the villains in this scene first? We got Robbie and Peaches. Both have got some villain talk they want to have.
Oh yeah, villain talk.
Oh,
My favorite segment of this show.
sure.
Um,
I'm gonna go first because
Yeah, I think yours makes sense to go
because-
first.
my impression is the blind not knowing as much about comics as you do.
Oh, there's so many
Is
blind
that-
references in this damn show. We
I'm
said the
not
word
trying
blind
to.
6,000
I just-
times.
I just say it so often because of video games and stuff too. I'm sorry. So, going in and not really knowing anything about the names of these characters, it this scene stood out to me because for me this is the first Marvel thing in a long time where the first impression of most of the villains is that they're all just douchebags. I don't know if you guys got that vibe right away too, but when they're all meeting and they're like standing in a circle and they're all just being rude to each other, and I'm like, I know we're gonna get some more development out of these. At least I would hope that we would, if I hadn't seen this before. But I know we're gonna get some more development out of these guys. But it's weird because, like, it is literally a bunch of jackasses standing in a circle, and that's how you're introduced to them. Is like just all these fucking idiots. Wow, sorry. This one's PG-13 now. And I don't know. It's not bad. There's just not like an MCU thing in the last 10, 15 years that I can think of where my very first impression of the villain is, wow, what an ass clown.
Right.
And that's what all of these ones give me, especially Wesley. I don't know what it is about that guy, but the way that he's always wearing a suit, buttoning it when he stands up, unbutton it when he sits down, like, I don't know, something about, he just gives off the highest form of douchebaggery.
It's the smarminess. I just want to slap him.
Yeah, like his little smirk when he shows the video to the guy in the park and he's like, oh, you're gonna do what I want now. Like, I don't know, they're slimy, and I don't know. This isn't a criticism. It's just different from what we've seen with other Marvel stuff, and it weirds me out.
Right, absolutely.
I found something about Owlman, apparently. The owl. Owlman is something else. That's the alternate universe Batman, right?
That's also Frank Miller.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It all makes sense. No, but yeah, what's his name? Owlsley? Of course it is. That's so.
Yes, Leland Owlsley. Yes.
I don't know what it was about that guy's performance, but I was like, I want to see more of this guy. There was just something about the way he delivered his lines. I'm like, this man is entertaining, and I want him around more.
I wish he were a part owl and levitating a little bit.
Yeah, I wish he could temporarily levitate as a treat.
So, to what you said, what I was going to talk about is this scene is like a who's who of potential future villains, and Peaches, to what you talked about not recognizing the names, and like I didn't either, especially they're not all introduced at this point. I do remember I realized that was Leland Owlsley, and I got really, really, really excited that Owl was going to be in this. I did not immediately recognize Nobu, even though they called him by his name. I didn't realize that for a little while later. And then James
is Madame Gao in the universe too, or is she for the show?
So. I think she's just for the Netflix series. I have never read or seen anything on Madame Gao. And the Russians, I think the Russians are not directly from their names, maybe, but they're more like just routine Punisher villains. But Leland Owlsley is absolutely the Owl. And to what Chris was saying, I was so excited because Owl was going to be in this, and yeah, Owl's kind of a stupid villain, but that's fine. We can have stupid villains. And he's just played so well. He's so interesting. I absolutely want more of him. Clearly, if you realize who Naboo is, you realize that the Hand is going to be in these things at some point. And then even James Wesley has never been a major villain, but he's just, Kingpin right-hand man dude, and it was cool that they brought him out in this. Gave him probably definitely a bigger role than I've ever seen him have in the comics. But that was cool. And so this whole scene gives you all these villains, and then the other thing is and Chris, you knew Kingpin was in this, right? I'm not ruining it. Okay, cool. And I knew Kingpin was going to be in this, but it's still, even when you know he's coming, it's really fun the way they're hyping him, the way that Wesley says, we don't say his name, my employer. You know who he's talking about, and it's so cool because they tantalize you for knowing the Kingpin's going to be in this, but they hold off for a few episodes before you actually see him. At the same time, there's a little bit of disappointment through the Netflix series. I don't think Owlsley was used the way I would have loved. And there's some other disappointment. It just feels like maybe this all could have been used better, but it's still cool seeing them all on that screen, in that meeting together. But really what I take away from this is when James Wesley says, my employer will be displeased by being inconvenienced by a lone vigilante with a mask. That line just makes me wish I could see Vincent D'Onofrio in a Spider-Man movie so badly.
Yeah.
Because the way that mentality, like that Kingpin mentality of, screw these mask dudes, is there in episode 1 of this series, and I just want that to be a part of a Spider-Man movie. But yeah, no, I don't think I think everything you said was correct, Peaches. It's a bunch of assholes, but it's also really exciting. At least in hindsight, it was really exciting looking at this scene and seeing how much this one little conversation is setting up so many different villain arcs for Daredevil and potentially other heroes to deal with.
Yeah, honestly, like I think it actually works more than it doesn't. Like, it doesn't bother me because you want to know more about all of them. You're like, why are these people the ones that are gathered here? Like, you kind of get a sense by the end of the episode of what each one contributes to the group.
Right.
But you still don't know that much about them other than these guys look like jerks. And somebody are, oh, Peaches, that's the point. They're the villains. Shut up. I get it. It's just what I noticed, okay? Leave Peaches alone.
No, I get exactly what you're saying. And when you said that, I started thinking about other MCU villains, and I just couldn't come up with one who's like that. The closest one I could come up with, though he's played for a comedic effect, is what's his name? Soundman, Black Panther's arch nemesis.
Claw?
Yeah.
Claw.
Yeah.
Sound Lord.
Yeah,
don't be impertinent.
Ulysses Claw is probably the closest one I can think of to look at him. He's a scumbag, but even him, it's a little bit more comedic than any of this. Owlsley is the only one here that feels like a Marvel villain, like an MCU villain.
That must be why I gravitated to him in that scene.
No, he's good. You will not be disappointed.
You know what? That's true. Okay, anyway, I don't have to say anymore. I'm just going to keep repeating myself.
Karen sneaks out of the Murdoch apartment and goes back to her own home, where she retrieves a thumb drive. As she does, she is attacked by Rance. Murdoch arrives in his mask, and after a brutal fight, is able to subdue Rance and save Paige. So, I do like this show. I like it a lot. But one criticism I do have of the show is that it is dark. And I mean that in every sense of the word. It is telling a dark story. There are a lot of dark things that happen, but also it's just shot really dark. There was the scene right here where Rance and Matt Murdock, and he's in the all black suit, are fighting in her apartment, and I couldn't tell what was happening. I want to say 70% of the time because it was so darkly shot, which sucks because a lot of the fight scenes in this show are really well choreographed. So it's a shame when they're shot so dark that you can't experience it. It makes me feel like the Battle of Winterfell in Game of Thrones.
Say that.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like what's the point of having all of this, all of this amazing action if you can't see any of it?
You gotta be careful if you say that. You're gonna get like the troll that pops out of the ceiling tile that's like, oh, Eduardo, the Battle of Winterfell was fought at night. You're not supposed to be able to see any of it.
I don't even watch that show, and the Twitter arguments about it made me angry.
Oh my gosh, same. Yeah, like with the cinematographers who were like defending themselves and the people pointing out, well, you should really take into account that a lot of people are going to watch these on screens that aren't ideal for that. It's not like when you film a movie and you send it off to the theaters and you get to tell them, okay, now have the bulb set at this setting.
Sure. Well, and I think Eduardo's completely correct. And something that, and I'm pretty sure Soundlord agrees with me on this, something that I think is often missed in a lot of film and media is thinking it's more important that we get the feel of what the fight was like rather than seeing what's happening in the fight. I think about a lot about like shaky cams and fast editing, and sometimes that's bad filmmaking from the standpoint of I don't have to choreograph a good fight scene because I'll just make the camera do the work. But also, like, Ridley Scott can choreograph a good fight scene and yet has fallen into shaky cam films. I'm thinking about City of Angels. City of Angels? No. City of God. Kingdom of Heaven. I got every name wrong. Kingdom of Heaven.
Touched by an angel.
Angel. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Anyway, but that idea of using, and something we've talked about that the MCU does very well is it doesn't do that. It shows you the action sequence, and that's less stylized, but so it's more interesting, and you actually see what's going on. And I think it's the same thing with fighting in the dark and fighting at night. And this was actually a criticism I had of a movie that doesn't need much criticism, but this was one small piece, was of Black Panther, that fight in the train scene, which is what people point at when they talk about the CGI of Black Panther. And the real problem is not that that Marvel Studios can't do good CGI, it's that scene was shot in a setting that is hard to do good CGI. Sometimes you got to think about, is this setting actually going to make a good fight sequence? And if it is, how can we improve it? And you maybe have to take some creative liberties, because people want to see your action. As we'll talk about in the next episode, there's action to be seen in this series. And you're right. Game of Thrones, angry people, it's Defenders, it is in the dark, it is at night, but that doesn't automatically make it good. That is potentially a legitimately poor decision.
I wonder how that translates to the whole season and all of the other Netflix shows for you, Eduardo, because I think almost all of them have very few literal bright spots. Like, it seems like all of the series are mostly in the dark, and I think they're trying to like encapsulate that grittiness more. Like, you see that in horror movies a lot, where the setting is like either dark, like gray, or it's like a green sometimes. And it almost feels like that. Like they're trying to kind of put you off with how dark it is, like make you uncomfortable.
Maybe it's just because I'm on the other side of it, and it's been however many years. Yeah. But I cannot tell you how fatigued I am by things being dark and gritty.
Agreed.
I was playing. Agreed. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. Yesterday, I was playing Fortnite with a friend of the show, Patrick, and we were talking about why it just is more fun to play than something like the Call of Duty Battle Royale. And it's because everything in the Call of Duty Battle Royale, even though it's a good game, is all like the same color, and it's all the same style, it's all the same feel. There's nothing exciting about it, right? I find things so much more exciting when they are vibrant and have color. And if you talk about that Black Panther scene, what makes that scene stand out so much is because the rest of that movie is so bright and colorful and beautiful, and that's why that scene stands out as, I would say, one of the sore spots, if not the sore spot of the movie, if there is one, because the rest of that movie is so beautiful.
Agreed. Or like, you're a big fan of, and I should play them, I know I would enjoy them, but you're a big fan of the Red Dead Redemption series, and I haven't played it, but one of the things that's so fascinating to me is how Red Dead Redemption 1 is just brown, like everything is a different shade of brown, and then the sequel is like, wait, grass is green, and the sky is blue. It's like
how far we've come and how much we've grown just over the years, and probably because of events that have happened in our lives. I'm sure all of us were at a point, I know I was, where when like the Dark Knight stuff was coming out, I was like, oh, gritty superhero movies are the coolest. I want everything to be gritty and real. And
because I was a teenager. I needed to feel the angst of my soul.
Yeah, now it's like, more colors, please.
I will still argue that the Dark Knight trilogy is not nearly as dark and gritty and dour as people remember.
Yeah, I think we discussed.
No, there are still. Oh, I mean, it's still...
It was like the crack cut with sugar, man. It was like it was the entry level grit.
I think we discussed this in another episode. No, keep going.
There are jokes in that movie. There is fun. There are some fun action sequences in that movie. Yeah, it is a serious look at Batman. And God, Batman, and really I think Daredevil, since I feel like you can really link those two characters, especially with their Frank Miller connections. I just feel like there are people who misunderstand, or with comic books in general, Batman being kind of the poster child of this.
Zack Snyder.
Maybe even,
he's talking about
Zack Snyder. I'm not just talking about Zack Snyder, but I'm certainly including that in this. Is that there's this idea that comic books have to be violent and dark and gritty to be taken seriously, and that's how we end up with someone saying, let's take the Fantastic Four and make it dark and gritty. I'm sorry, they're called the Fantastic Four because the guy that can stretch his arms out calls himself Mr. Fantastic. There's the Invisible Girl, the Thing, the Human Torch. You don't do that seriously and
Mhm.
dark. And this is why I will always use the Guardians movies as my counter example, because those movies, as we talked about, still have real emotional heft to them and can be moving and mature, and also have a talking tree and an angry raccoon with a gun. It doesn't have to be dark and serious.
Right.
I am tortured and tormented, and my mother is dead, and
Pete
it's
Holmes?
yeah.
I would argue.
I will
that-
argue.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
We'll
wow, that
both
was...
argue.
Oh. No, you argue first. That was sexy.
I don't even know if I'm going to argue with you, but I would say it starts even further back than Dark Knight. I think 90s comics in general were very much like,
Yep.
we need to go dark and gritty. This character isn't popular. What should we do? How about we kill them? Oh, genius!
And I think it's because Frank Miller's Daredevil
Yep.
and Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns
Yeah.
was successful.
Yep.
And I'll throw Watchmen in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I need to watch that.
Which to that, and I still need to watch that show too. Yeah, but I've read Watchmen and I saw the movie as well, and I would argue I need to go back and read Watchmen again now that I'm older and smarter. You know, I still think that I will like it very much, but I think that there is some commentary on dark and gritty superheroes in Watchmen that a lot of people just took at face value
Correct.
as dark
Yes.
and gritty superheroes.
Yes. Absolutely.
Rorschach's not a good guy.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
well, and this also reminds me of, I don't know, I'm certain Soundlord remembers, but I don't know if you guys remember when the Wind Waker was in production and
Oh,
first out,
yes.
and
Yeah.
there was this whole reaction of, well, but Zelda games are supposed to be serious and dark, and it's like, did you play Link to the Past? Like, but that was a thing that was happening back then. Like, what?
Uh-huh.
Look at how beautiful this game is. It can't be pretty. And
Yeah.
so Eduardo.
Wind Waker, by the way, the lighthearted Zelda game that ends with Link stabbing Ganondorf through the brain.
And then flooding the world.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Like, there is a darkness to that as well that belies its cheerful exterior,
Right.
but it also has a lot of fun and lightness to it as well.
yeah,
But, Zelda was also, there are games for kids. You don't want a dark and gritty Super Mario Brothers, right?
I ran into a YouTube comment section that was asking for that the other day. Like a
Never
whole
run
bunch
into
of people.
YouTube comment sections.
Whole bunch of people arguing. I'll show it to you guys afterwards, but a whole bunch of people arguing for how much they need a dark and gritty Mario game.
I don't know how.
Except for Peach's YouTube channel, you should run into those comment sections.
Oh yeah.
I'm saying.
Oh gosh, it's like the people who are like, "Oh, do you know what I really want is an R-rated Star Wars?" Then you don't understand Star Wars. I'm
Correct.
sorry.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with Eduardo. I was never super into the dark and gritty thing, but I'm also like, I'm real fatigued on it at this point. It's a miracle that I like this show.
We need happy and light now.
But I think this show,
that's what we need 2020 going forward.
Yeah, but also I think the show is kind of to Chris's point about the Christopher Nolan series of there is darkness and there is grittiness, but this show isn't about that darkness and grittiness. It uses it to effect, but there's plenty of heart and comedy and bright spots within it as well.
And there's nothing wrong with grim and gritty either. It's just so many people think that grim and gritty equals smart, which it doesn't always.
Well, and I think there's a point where you use grim and gritty exclusively to tell a story rather than as a theme or a part of your story, and that's when you run into the problem, is when you are only dark and gritty, then you have no substance.
Yeah, and also dark and gritty isn't subversive anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, it hasn't been subversive since 1993.
Sure.
So, I mean...
I don't think you're wrong at all. So, yeah, I just wish it was a little brighter. Maybe I could turn the brightness up on my TV, but also I don't feel like I should.
Correct. I agree.
It's not something I feel like I should, because the rest of the show would seem way washed out and it wouldn't look as good, right? Like,
yeah.
So Matt takes the thumb drive, and Karen insists he can't trust the police, so he decides to tell everyone, leaving Rance and the thumb drive tied up in front of the police station the next morning. In the aftermath, Wesley speaks with his employer on the phone, arranging to have Karen's boss pinned for the UIC corruption, and then made to look like he died by overdose, while Rance is pinned for the murder of Daniel Fisher. The two decide to leave Paige alone, but start a file on her attorneys. Karen offers her services as a secretary for Nelson and Murdoch, and the group have dinner together. Madame Gao looks over a collection of blinded workers preparing drugs. Owsley shuffles numbers through UAC accounts. Nobu looks over construction plans in Hell's Kitchen. Mr. Farnham's daughter finds her father dead by a self-inflicted gunshot while Rance is found hanging in his jail cell. The Russians abduct a child whose cries are heard by a masked Matt Murdock standing on a rooftop.
Do you know what that scene reminded me of? I think it was Superman Returns. There's a shot, I'm pretty sure that's the Superman movie where there's a shot of Superman in space.
Yeah,
and he's hearing
that's the
every call for
Brandon
help.
Routh one.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Which I will say is, and this is not a compliment, I think that's the best Superman movie. Challenge me on that.
I don't know if I've seen enough Superman movies to.
You should not see any more Superman movies.
You should watch Superman and Superman 2.
I feel like people don't actually like Superman. I feel like they have an idea of what they want Superman to be. The problem is everybody has a different idea of what they want Superman to be, and so they'll never make a good Superman movie because everyone's opinion of what Superman should be is different.
He's talking about Zack Snyder again.
Superman is a resume.
See, I think the problem right now is that the guy that's making Superman movies doesn't like Superman.
I mean, that's a big problem.
That's my theory.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's been many years since I've watched them, but I did enjoy the first 2 Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And I like Superman Returns as well. But again, it's been many years since I've seen them. Maybe if I revisited them, I wouldn't feel as positively towards them. But that John Williams score.
The music's great.
A+.
So what did you guys think after? So we're at the end of the first episode. What did you guys think of the first episode? As a whole.
So hype. It made me hype.
Same.
It felt like a first episode, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But it had all the things that you expected a first episode. Yeah. Introduction of the character, flashback to the origin of the superpowers. Here are all the villains that we could be seeing. Montage of what those villains are actually doing. Hint at a bigger villain yet to be revealed. Let's get the characters together. With Karen, becoming the secretary or receptionist or whatever her job title is, which is probably many things by the end of this, I'm sure, since they're a law firm with 3 employees. But
yeah,
I was saying this to my roommate after I watched it. Like, I know that it because it went straight to Netflix and the series was planned. It's not like it was a pilot episode, but as a first episode, it felt very well done, well made. Like it felt complete. It didn't feel like an idea, which is nice. I don't know. I think and you didn't, Chris. You didn't say that it did any of those things poorly.
No.
I think it was a perfect way to kick off my interest in the rest of the show for me. I thought that they covered a lot of ground really well. About the character and the interest in what the hell the villains were doing, and we knew it was Kingpin, but like we didn't get to see him yet. Like, I want to see him. I want to see what he looks like.
Yeah, we heard his voice, and it's like, oh, bring him on, and then they didn't.
Yeah.
So it got me really excited for the second episode, which I watched immediately afterward. The first time, and the second time, and this time.
I think I watched this whole season in like 2 days. The first time. It's very interesting the way it is all set up. Like, when you think back on what happens in this episode, it is all set up. And yet, at the same time, manages to have an open middle and end to a storyline. Karen will have more storylines. Sorry, Soundlord, to spoil that for you. Karen will have more storylines going forward. But within this one contained episode, there is a Karen is in trouble. Karen has a conflict. Karen is rescued. Storyline that shuts, and I think that's kind of hard to do. I think it's hard to have a lot of setup while also having the catalyst for a lot of that setup having a resolution within that same episode. Mm-hmm. And it never feels particularly noisy either.
I haven't done this in a while, but I'm going to disagree with all of you.
Ooh.
I wasn't a big fan of this episode for a lot of the reasons you guys are saying. It felt like a pilot episode, and I I know I didn't like it because I really liked episode 2, and episode 2 feels very different from episode 1. The way they tell the story in episode 2 is very different than the way they tell the story in episode 1. Episode 1 feels like the first episode of any major TV show on a network, which is why calling it a pilot is so effective. It makes me feel like the first episode of Angel. If you've seen that episode, it's sort of like, here's Angel, and this is sort of how every Angel episode is. And there's a few shows that are like this, where it's like, here is this person, here is a conflict for them to deal with this episode, and then we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of some conflict that we'll deal with at the very end. And it didn't feel like it was telling a larger story yet. And I think the episode, I was kind of like, well, that was it. Like, it felt so abrupt. Like, they had the conflict and then it was immediately solved. And it all seemed to happen so fast that what I enjoy about these Netflix shows is the sort of slow burn of the building of anticipation and them kind of working through these conflicts, which they do for the rest of the season. So from episode 2 on, that's sort of the style of the show. But episode 1 feels like its own thing. It just didn't necessarily work for me.
I actually agree with everything you said, and yet still like it.
I'm not saying I dislike it. I'm just saying those are the things that I didn't like.
No, I agree that it feels like this was the first episode of a show that is actually on television, not Netflix.
Well, I am, this might be where I might end up disagreeing with you guys a little bit here, if I'm understanding you. I think if you're a TV show, even if you're on Netflix, you still have to act like a TV show. And I think part of being a TV show is that you're broken up into episodes, and each episode has to, I mean, yes, it can be an overarching story across the season, but I still feel like each episode needs to work as an individual thing. I don't like it when people say, "Oh, this isn't a TV show. We're thinking of it as a 13-hour movie." I think that's bullshit. I think that it is a 13-episode TV show that is telling a season-long story. And you need to remember what an episode is and not just be like, and we'll cut it here because we're at 45 minutes now. I still think that, I mean, yeah, there could be like 2-part episodes are a different beast, but I don't like it when they try to treat it as a long movie that's cut up into digestible parts. I still think that, an episode needs to work as an episode as well as a part of the whole.
I agree and disagree all at the same time.
Yeah, right. I think I think that's correct, but I also think that might result in some episodes that, just by the nature of what you just said, this episode is going to have to be weaker because this is the introductory episode, which is not, I've already said I like this episode, but
yeah,
sort of like shooting in darkness. If that's a necessary evil, that's going to mean sometimes you see the evil.
Yeah, and I almost feel like, I apologize, Chris, but I feel like that's an antiquated way of viewing it. I think that's you're looking at it from the lens of, well, this is how TV has been and this is how TV needs to be. But we live in an age where we don't just get piecemealed episodes one at a time and have to digest them individually. Most people are digesting content like this in large quantities. They are looking at them. They are sitting down watching 4 or 5 episodes in a row. They are viewing them as a full context. So I think they're being...
I'm excited for all those people that have that much time.
I mean, sure. Obviously, sure. And that's great. But I think that's a lot of the design of some of these seasons now and some of these shows is to be for those people that consume content that way, which I think people have found is a lot of people. A lot of people tend to consume content like that nowadays. And I think that's who a lot of these Netflix shows are geared towards.
Yeah, especially think of Stranger Things.
That's what made Mandalorian hard.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Mandalorian is a great example of it working in the opposite way, right? Like, they're like, no, we're not going to give you what you want. We're gonna build anticipation a different way, a more traditional TV show way. And it's not to say that it's any better or worse, but I think it really worked to their advantage in The Mandalorian because of how people were conditioned to consume content in several hour increments.
Yeah,
right.
I saw someone once say, and I have no way of testing if this is correct, but I saw someone once say that The Mandalorian has it right, and that something like Stranger Things missed out on not piecemealing their episodes, because then you've got people watching something, talking about that thing they just watched for the week, then seeing the thing again, and that potentially Stranger Things could have dominated a larger portion of the public consciousness if it was just doing one episode at a time. Although I will argue that Stranger Things really buys into the, this is a 13-hour movie thing. They don't feel like
Absolutely.
contained episodes to me in Stranger Things, but that's kind of a side point. I think The Mandalorian, part of its success was the fact that we were kind of like we used to do with television, showing up to work and talking about, I guarantee you now, where I work makes this less surprising, but I guarantee every single day after the release of The Mandalorian, everyone at work is talking about this week's Mandalorian. And that went on for weeks instead over a couple weeks, we were talking about the season as a whole, or having to be careful and like step around it. You guys all watched
How far have you gotten
and
yet? Yeah.
Peaches and Eduardo watched Game of Thrones, and it was definitely like our group chat for several weeks on end was what just happened in Game of Thrones,
every Sunday,
what's
baby.
about to happen in Game of Thrones. Like, I do think there's something to that old concept.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if Mandalorian would have been as successful if we didn't have a new Baby Yoda meme.
That
every week.
said,
Chicky nuggies, baby.
Well, and like Baby Yoda is a great example because that first episode, you get shown Baby Yoda at the end, and then you have to wait a week to figure out why there is a Baby Yoda even in the first place, and you never really even get that answer. But that week of just talking about, like, did you see the Baby Yoda? That was such a fantastic week.
Like, it made you like, I want it to be next week now so I can see this next episode because my jaw dropped.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it'll be very interesting because I think both of you are right, and I like the ability to just sit and watch Daredevil all at once, which is basically what I did. And yet that hype building, if things were done the old-fashioned way, there might be something to that too. So the reason I bring that up is it's interesting. We're doing this mostly to prep for the Disney Plus Marvel series, and it will be interesting to see, since those are going to be handled, from everything we know, different from the binge method, and it'll be interesting for us to see how it goes, just seeing an episode a week at a time.
It's interesting because Anthony Mackie has talked about that show, and he's talked about how it's basically just a 6-hour Marvel movie. But
I
there,
just think that's marketing bugs.
You think so?
I think that's a term that is overused.
I also,
by calling it a 6-hour movie. I think that that's just marketing speak. Yes, I'm sure it's telling one overall story, but I don't know. I just think it's one of those phrases that's overused
I'm
too
interested
much now, and that might be why I'm annoyed by it. Like, not necessarily in concept so much as people both trying to say, "Oh, this is just a really long movie that we're releasing in 1-hour chunks." I mean, that's what the Snyder Cut is going to be. That is actually going to be a 4-hour movie released in 4 episodes.
Wait, really? Why?
Yeah. Because it's long and people yelled on the internet.
We're still talking about a movie?
Was that?
What?
Oh boy. No, but
That was Eduardo's nickname in high school.
My nickname was It Was Long, and people yelled about it on the internet.
Yep. That's the one.
the other thing I will say though, and I promise I'll drop the subject now, is that there is this weird hierarchy that people have in their mind of cinema and television, and movies are the be-all end-all of visual entertainment, and then you have TV down here. And I don't think that's true. I think both of them can be completely valid art forms. I mean, you look...
I also think a whole lot more people agree with you on that now these days.
Yes, yeah, I think people...
I don't think you're on a limb anymore.
Yeah, I think people have come around on that, definitely. But you still have, people who go from making movies to making TV shows, and they try to justify it by saying, "Oh, well, this is a long form movie." You can say you're making a TV show. Ain't no shame in it. You take a show like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad. I think those things were successful because they were TV shows. If they were movies, they would have been successful, but would they have been as artistically successful? Arguably, no.
You're not...
Interestingly,
Good.
there are 5 good seasons of Breaking Bad. and there are 5 good seasons of Game of Thrones.
I think a lot of people can agree with you, Chris, and I think there are a lot of people that send a. I want to talk the anime revolution that's sort of happened in our culture throughout the past few years. There are more people watching anime than ever before, and anime is some of the most serialized content you will ever watch. I started watching One Piece 2 years ago. I am about 500 episodes in, and I am only halfway through all of the episodes that are out, and they are still making new episodes.
Oh, God.
They said they're not going to finish until about 2026, 2027. That's when the story will finally end.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Reminds me of webcomics.
That's daunting.
It is insane. But part of the daunting part of it makes me want to get there, because like it's almost like a challenge at this point to like reach the end and be like, I conquered Mount One Piece. I'm gonna get a bumper sticker for my car.
This car drove up Mount One Piece.
That sounds like something you'd get on a T-shirt from Hooters.
Mount One
I'll
Piece,
tell
don't
you
mind
that
if I do.
I knew very little about Avatar, and that was part of my fear of getting into it, was I just assumed Avatar was like that. I just assumed there were 3,000 Avatar episodes. The fact that I finished season 1 in a couple days is like, oh, okay.
Avatar and Korra both, I think, cut off at a smart point. They didn't keep going. Anyway, we're so in the weeds now. Like,
Yeah.
we got to talk about this.
We got a second episode.
We have a whole second episode. All right, episode 2.
And we have to do it all in one take.
I remember I was really worried. I was so worried we wouldn't find things to talk about.
Why do you always say that about our longest episodes? It's like you have a sixth sense of being wrong.
It's like you don't know
that's
anything about what we've done here the last 30 episodes.
So episode 2.
Remember the Hulk episode?
Episode 2 opens when a teenage boy finds a battered and bleeding costumed Matt Murdock in a dumpster. The boy retrieves a young woman, played by Rosario Dawson, Beast on My Heart, who helps Murdock out of the dumpster and into her apartment. The woman starts to work on Murdock's injuries and tries to call 911, but he stops her, saying the cops can't be trusted, then passes out. All right. I need to talk about Rosario Dawson for a second, because not only do I have a gigantic crush on her, but she is so good. She just it's like effortless, and it is. I am not saying any of the actors on Daredevil are bad by any means, because a lot of them have really good, strong performances. Specifically, the actor that plays Matt Murdock is very good. I think some of the other performances are a little like, I think both Karen and Foggy are hit or miss at times for me. There are times when I don't find them especially believable, but
oh, you should see Robbie's face right now, listeners.
And it's okay when it's just Matt, Karen, and Foggy, but when you add in an actor to the caliber of Rosario Dawson, it brings out some of those qualities that I don't necessarily enjoy about the way the other characters are being portrayed. I think Rosario Dawson just has a way of just making you believe her character, like she just is her character. And maybe it's partially because Rosario Dawson is one of those actors that tends to, in a lot of ways, play herself in a lot of the characters. Like, I think this is a very Rosario Dawson character. And so it makes it a lot easier to kind of fall into it and play it convincingly and well. And this isn't to say any of those actors are bad. I just think Rosario Dawson's really, really good.
I agree with that, but I'm never going to forget that Deborah Ann Wool slander you just put out there.
I see her.
I agree with you on the Foggy point of it. I also don't really agree with you on the Karen point of it.
I think Foggy gets better as the series goes on.
Yeah.
I had forgotten how kind of, and by kind of I mean extremely annoying Foggy was early on.
He's very much though. This is the funny guy.
Yep.
And no, I also have a massive crush on Rosario Dawson. I have since the day I saw Josie and the Pussycats in theaters.
I just learned so many things about you from that one sentence.
No, okay. You know when they ask you like what's your guilty pleasure movie? Like which movie do you actually feel very strongly about, even though you know it's terrible? That's Josie and the Pussycats for me.
It's a comic movie. We should talk about it on the show.
It's reassemble Josie and the Pussycats. One cat at a time.
Yeah.
I would do a Josie and the Pussycats podcast so fast you don't even know. I'll be completely prepped. I'll be completely prepped with the Archie comic, with the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, with the movie itself, like with the anti-capitalism message in the film. Okay, anyway.
She was on Riverdale too.
What? Oh, was she?
Yeah, I think so. I think Josie and the Pussycats were in it.
Oh, we're in Riverdale. Yeah, it's all connected. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about Rosario Dawson was on Riverdale.
Oh, no. No, she was on Jane the Virgin, same channel.
She was on Jane the Virgin.
Yeah.
She was in Men in Black 2. That's the first thing I saw her in.
And she might be in The Mandalorian season 2.
Ooh, have you seen 7 Pounds?
Yeah, the rumor is that she's playing Ahsoka.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Yep. I was so excited about that.
Yeah.
7 Pounds will mess you up. Don't watch it in 2020.
Ooh,
okay.
That movie is very sad.
Yeah, watch that when things are nice in the world. Don't watch it now.
She's also in Rent.
I'll try to remember
if
in 10
you've
years.
seen the Rent.
Oh,
movie.
yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, she's what's her name?
Yeah, her. I don't remember her.
Mimi.
Mimi, yes.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I don't have anything to say that Eduardo didn't like. I was so excited when I realized she was in this, and she is scene stealing in every Netflix, MCU whatever we want to call it show she's in. Every time she's on,
and it's weird because she's in multiple of these seasons, and I'm sure she's got other things going on, but I almost feel like she's underused. And maybe this is a spoiler for Chris, I guess, for the rest of all the other seasons, but I feel like she's not used to her full potential as she probably could be. I think this is the season where she gets sort of the most, and then it sort of drops off as seasons go on. And I personally assume it's because she's got other stuff going on and she can't devote a full season to something like this because she's Rosario Dawson.
I feel like I heard that there was one of the Netflix shows they wanted her to be in, and she didn't. She had conflicts. I don't know if that was The Punisher or something.
That makes sense.
Haven't seen The Punisher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to assume she's the most expensive person on this show.
Yeah.
Like, right? No one is commanding Rosario Dawson's check.
Vincent D'Onofrio?
Probably not. Maybe. Oh, hey, Men in Black connection. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'll bet. I'm assuming he or Charlie Cox made the most from this, but in terms of a per second on screen price tag, it's got to be Rosario Dawson.
I would assume,
and I imagine that's part of why she's less used in it.
Yeah.
The way she's used to connect all the characters ends up being very smart. We discussed this on the Doctor Strange episode, but she's an amalgamation of Claire Temple. Is a character from the Daredevil comics, but not an important one. But she was supposed to be Night Nurse. She was supposed to be
Rachel. Was it?
Yeah,
Rachel?
she was supposed to be Rachel McAdams' character.
Oh, that's the actress. That's
yeah, right. She was supposed to be Rachel McAdams' character.
Christine
from Doctor
Strange. Is that
Strange.
the name?
Christine Palmer.
Thank you. That just popped into my head.
Yes, she was supposed to be the Night Nurse, and that was going to be her connection, which it is her connection. She's the nurse to the superheroes. The way that's used, even though she's not actually Christine Palmer, but is effectively filling the Christine Palmer role in this, is very smart. The way that she, because she runs into them and she's in the neighborhood, she ends up fixing up all these superheroes. Her connection from one of the series to another, I think, is really, really great. And she gets some great stuff as this series goes on.
I'm curious.
When they were speaking Spanish, were there subtitles?
No, I don't think so.
I love
what did they say?
Because I had subtitles on.
I love when shows do that. They didn't say anything crazy. It was mostly just like her telling him to like get upstairs or something. But I love when shows do that.
Yeah, I actually do too.
Oh, I
feel
think
like if I have to know, you're gonna.
I feel like I understand.
She wasn't speaking
because I remember there being something like "not even your mother." So that
you're right.
There
might have been subtitles there because I remember.
Because if I understood it, it was subtitled.
That's possible.
Because I remember reading that and being like, "That's not exactly what she said," but I digress.
Oh yeah.
If they wanted to have Rosario play Night Nurse? Why didn't they just use, because Doctor Strange wasn't coming out until 2016, so maybe the filming had already started for Doctor Strange, or they already had written the story, but why not just call her character Christine Palmer instead of Claire Temple?
There was a reason for that. I know I read a reason for it, and off the top of my head, I cannot remember the reason. So
No,
I'm sorry,
I think
don't have an answer.
I think that they were planning on it, and then it came down the pike that they wanted to use that character in Doctor Strange, so they said, "Oh, you can't use her on."
Yeah,
on
it's
Netflix
probably
shows anymore."
that's
Yeah.
probably the correct
Movies
answer.
always get first dibs on characters,
right, and that they probably knew
Interesting.
ahead of time that we're gonna do this. So,
Well, alrighty then.
wait, okay. Daredevil showrunner Stephen S. DeKnight noted that the character was originally going to be the actual Night Nurse from the comics. We had her name in a script, and it came back that it was possible we were going to use her, and had plans down. Plans down the road. She was going to be. I've already forgotten
Christine
her name.
Palmer.
Yeah, she was going to be Christine Palmer. They needed to change it because they knew they were going to use Christine Palmer in the movies.
I don't know. I mean, she barely plays a part in Doctor Strange. That could have been their crossover.
Correct.
They could have just let Rosario Dawson be Rachel McAdams.
Also, you're now making me pick between Rachel McAdams and Rosario Dawson, and that's rude.
Yes. No, it's not.
Anyway,
Yeah, before we move on, Chris and Peaches, you guys haven't said a nice thing about Rosario Dawson, and we're not moving on until you do.
Yes, I did. I just said that she should have played Christine Palmer in Doctor Strange.
Oh.
Yeah, and then you said, let me rewind. You said I have to make you choose, and I said that it wasn't a choice.
Just say the
Team
correct
Rosario.
answer. Yes, okay, there we go.
I think she's great. I thought she was better than the Broadway person in Rent. If you've ever listened to the original cast recording of Rent, I am not a fan of that Mimi.
It's pronounced.
I might cut this out on the off chance that she listens to our show.
Hey, man, you be you. You gotta listen. They gotta be able to take criticism, okay?
I don't like saying bad things about people.
It's not bad. It's just a performance review.
I preferred Rosario Dawson. I thought she was great on Jade the Virgin, and I like her in this. Yeah,
she was. Also...
I thought that me bringing her up. Oh, she was on Jade the Virgin, and she might play Ahsoka. I thought that I was positive enough in that, but no, I will explicitly state she's a good actress.
She was also the best Pussycat.
She was the best Pussycat, according to Robbie. Bam, bam, bam. Watch new Pussycat. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Okay, enough of that.
Alrighty.
In a flashback, young Matty Murdock and his father Jack bound as Matty stitches up his father after his father after a lost fight. Jack shows Matty a large stack of cash he earned despite the loss, but is clearly angry about the situation when Matty leaves. While Karen and Foggy connect and get drinks, the woman working on Murdock introduces herself as Claire Temple. I think she just introduces herself as Claire. But
she does.
Yeah, she never said her last name.
Murdock tells her he went to find the abducted boy he had heard from the end of the first episode, but walked into a trap where he got beaten. Flashback picks back up with Matty in the hospital, having lost his vision, but struggling to handle his suddenly improved hearing. While Claire works on stitching up Murdock, Matt hears and smells a man searching the apartment building several stories below, showing up how attuned his abilities are. Murdock further explains he inherited the ability to take a vicious beating from his father, and we get another flashback. Matty is seen learning Braille when his father is pulled away by a pair of Irish mobsters. Unknowing that Matty can hear the conversation, the mobsters explain they have arranged a huge fight for Jack, and that Jack will need to throw the fight in the 5th round for them all to make a lot of money. In the present, a detective shows up at Claire Temple's apartment to ask her if she's seen the man in the mask, which she denies. Murdock can sense the detective didn't believe her, and the man makes a phone call and rushes as he leaves. Matt is able to knock out the detective by dropping a fire extinguisher down several flights of stairs with pinpoint accuracy, which seen by the teen who previously found him in the dumpster. How is this man not dead?
Also, did that remind anyone else of American Psycho? Am I
I've
the
not
only
seen
one
it.
here that's seen
Yeah.
American Psycho? That's
I've only
weird.
seen it once,
Okay.
and I don't remember that
Well,
much.
one day you'll watch American Psycho, and it'll remind you of this. So,
Mhm.
but
How
yeah,
is this
no,
man
he's
not
dead.
dead? He's
right?
dead. There's
He's
no
dead.
way.
No, he's not dead. He's not dead.
No,
I mean,
he's
if-
still alive to be tortured later.
Oh, well,
so-
Yeah.
I understand that he is alive later in the show, but
Oh,
he
but
should
yeah, in
be
real life,
he should be dead.
no, his brain
Is
mushy.
Is it the same dude that does Cinema Sins that does the YouTube series where they talk about all the times in a movie or a show that the person who was injured would actually have died? Like they go over the injury and they say like, here's what actually would have happened to them. Like
Oh,
broken skull, dead.
I don't want to watch
Yeah.
that. That would make me so uncomfortable. Oh,
Yeah.
Because I bet that this episode has a lot of everybody's should be
yes.
dead.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
definitely.
Even the dumpster part, which we'll get to. That dumpster
Mhm.
part, he should be dead.
Mhm.
Yeah. Agreed, Eduardo.
Yeah.
Claire helps Murdoch pull the Russian up to the roof and string him up. There, she tells him she chose to help him because she had heard so many stories through her job as a nurse and around the neighborhood of the man in the black mask saving people from criminals. In another flashback, Maddie reminds his father that Murdochs take a lot of hits, but always get back up. Jack
Point of order.
frantically-
Maddie got his dad killed through his own pride. He shamed his father into getting killed. I just want to establish that.
He didn't shame his father. He was saying that it would be nice to hear his people cheering for his dad. He was trying to encourage him.
Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't
And then
know.
he got shot.
I don't think a 10-year-old kid is gonna know like if he doesn't do what those people say, they're gonna kill him. I think
And
he's
here's
just like,
where we
"Come on,
go
Dad."
back to he's a 10-year-old Catholic boy. He's going to feel bad
Yeah.
about it. He's going to be like,
Yeah.
this was my fault.
Yes, which he
I
does.
did not honor my father.
No, I didn't think it was like. I didn't see it like that. I don't know.
Good
if
job,
you're
Maddie. You got
trolling.
your dad killed.
Oh, okay. So this is the Star-Lord argument of the
I was
MNU.
waiting for someone to
Well-
make the Star-Lord connection.
Well, this and is this any different from saying that Peter Parker feels guilty for Uncle Ben's death because his inaction led directly to that happening?
With great ability comes great accountability.
That's not even the phrase.
Get your Peter Tingle out of here.
You've gone too far.
Jack frantically places a massive wager on himself to win by knockout and arranges for the money to be left to Maddie. He then calls an unnamed woman telling him Maddie is going to need her, and he just wants to hear his father get cheered one time. On Claire's roof, Murdoch starts to interrogate the Russian. Claire becomes angered by the thug bragging about the strength of their human trafficking organization and helps Murdoch torture him. Chris.
Yeah.
Torture. In a superhero movie?
It's more likely than you think.
What's worse, a superhero torturing one person, or a superhero unknowingly killing hundreds and hundreds of people as he battles another superpowered person through a city?
Ooh.
Neither's great. Is that a serious question? Because I'm not. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know if it's a serious question or not. It just makes
I
me
don't
think
know,
of
yeah.
Man of Steel, of superheroes that probably should be doing, that aren't doing
Yeah.
superhero things.
Yeah, it's so I always find torture scenes hard to watch just on a visceral level. First of all, like when he sticks that dagger in the guy's eye socket, just God, my God, just like I'm cringing just thinking about it. But I also find it really uncomfortable when a character who is ostensibly the good guy is using torture. And I feel like it's a pretty common trope nowadays, particularly in the 21st century, post 9/11, for whatever reason. Like 24, Jack Bauer tortured people all the time to get information. And that information would usually end up saving the day. So the ends justify the means.
The only episode of 24 I ever saw, he literally decapitated a captive criminal to make some
My
sort of
God.
point. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Continue.
There,
Yeah.
this podcast, this
podcast about superhero movies and TV shows is probably not the venue for a long discussion on the Geneva Convention and the ethics of torture. We don't need to get deep into whether states should be torturing, to get information if that's going to prevent things. I certainly have my opinions on it, which you can probably guess by me talking about how uncomfortable I am watching Daredevil do it, or any quote unquote good guy doing it. I tend to think that if you don't live up to your own ideals, then are you the good guy anymore? Maybe not. At the very least, though, if they're going to present the good guy in a show or a movie torturing someone, even if it's a bad guy, like this is a bad guy who's in human trafficking, kidnapping children, all horrible, 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 horrible things, obviously. But they're presenting this in excruciatingly realistic detail. It, at least to me, needs to be examined critically in the story. It can't just be presented as the guy doing what he has to do to save the day. And maybe that's coming later in the season or later in the series. I don't know. Haven't watched the rest of it yet. But if this just becomes, this is what Daredevil does, is he tortures people, and well, he saved the day, so it's fine. I would not be comfortable with that. I feel like if you're going to introduce something as important, I guess I want to say, is something as serious as torture, and something that is still debated to this day about its role in imprisoning people, or I guess, it's an important issue, and I feel like it needs to be treated as such in the story to justify its use. Otherwise, it's just, for lack of a better phrase, torture porn. Like they say about like certain horror movies. So it just becomes, oh, this is shocking. This is dark and gritty. Look at what a serious show we're being. Now, violent acts, torture, serious themes aren't just for shock value or just to make it gritty and mature. That doesn't fly. Like, if you want to be a mature show, then you deal with those things. My opinion. And like I said, maybe it's coming. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I think it's hard to watch for anyone. I already talked about how the whole eye thing freaked me out. But I think it kind of continues the sort of darkness conversation that we've been having of sort of this. It feels like every time somebody says they're making something dark and gritty, they try to up the ante on the last person that made something dark and gritty, to the point where you're not even making a superhero story anymore. And I understand the whole anti-hero thing, but take the number one anti-hero of them all, Deadpool. That movie isn't like dark and gritty from like from that kind of sense. That movie's bright and fun and hilarious, and he is also an anti-hero, and he also does really bad stuff, but it doesn't have to be so sort of graphic and visceral. So I agree with you, Chris, that this scene is a lot to take in. I am going to be 100% honest, and I don't actually remember if this is something that's dealt with or not. And if you guys remember, don't say anything, because I want it to be something that Chris experiences on his own. But I couldn't tell you. Right. I already said I don't remember a lot of this show, and I have no idea if we talk about it or not. So we're going to find out.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, everything I'm thinking, I agree with all of your statements on torture. I can't figure out how much of what I'm thinking is based on later episodes, because I can't necessarily isolate, I can't compartmentalize my feelings on Matt Murdock at this point in this time, 2 episodes in.
I'm right there with you. I don't remember it enough either, but it definitely feels weird given the way that we've seen a lot of our other superhero stories in the last 10 years or so. Like it stands out particularly, especially going back to what we said earlier, because he is a man of the law.
Yep.
The two get the Russian to leak the location of the abducted boy. Murdoch leaves to find him while Claire goes to hide. In one more flashback, Jack wins his fight, much to Maddie's excitement as the crowd chants Murdoch. As Maddie waits for his father to return home, he hears a gunshot and runs outside to find his father dead in the alley. Maddie, God, I'm having a lot of trouble right now. Maddie begins crying daddy, which transitions to the abducted boy crying for his daddy in the Russian hideout. The man in the mask arrives, and in a continuous single-camera shot in a hallway with 2 doors, Matt Murdock takes out a horde of Russian mobsters single-handedly. Okay. I don't know if I'm supposed to read that or not.
No, you're not. No. I pointed out for listeners at home, I pointed out that that's one short paragraph for something that deserves way more than a short paragraph. But since there's no dialogue or even really like plot advancement, it's like, what do you write about it? I even pulled up the script. Like, how did the script describe the scene? It's 2 lines. It's like, so it's interesting.
Happens.
Yes, right. Basically, that's what it is. A fight happens, and it's like that's true, but that's not really all that happens.
This scene is good enough that if you have watched the first 2 episodes of Daredevil season 1, you remember this scene. This is the thing about, like, of all the things I remember from the stuff I've watched, which is Daredevil season 1 and season 2, this is the scene from season 1 I remember vividly. And I will not say the season 2 scene I remember vividly because it is messed up. And it hurts me thinking about it.
All right, Peaches, go off. Talk about the scene.
Oh, okay. No. So obviously I really like this scene. Everybody really likes this scene. Even people that don't really care for the show would probably see this scene and go, huh, that was really cool that it was done in one shot. Probably not one take, but one shot. And what I like about it especially is in this fight where he's going in and out of the rooms, and sometimes you see the action and sometimes you don't. When Daredevil is fighting, I mean, he has just been patched up by Night Nurse, so he's obviously not in the best shape. Like, he was found in a dumpster. He woke up not able to breathe. They had to give him like a whatever it's called to poke a hole in his lungs so air would come out of it. And then he went and went after this kid anyway to rescue him. So like, he is not at full health. You know, he went into the boss battle with like 20% health and no potions. And this is the way that he wasn't this beat up, but when he fought Rance at the end of episode 1, what I'm about to say holds true too. Matt fights like you don't really know he's gonna win. Like, in this fight scene, he punches a few guys, and then after he lands a punch, he like groans over in pain, or he like throws himself up against the wall to rest for just a second, or he like almost falls to the floor, and then a guy comes at him and he quickly like takes care of that. He'll, counter and punch him, and then he'll do it again. And I think that fighting style, I don't know that it makes it more realistic because I've never been in a fight like that, but it makes it feel, I don't know how to say it without saying a lot of the same crap we always say, because I want to say grounded, but it's like he doesn't feel overpowered at all like superheroes sometimes feel. It feels like he's
a human.
Is evenly matched. And yeah, he's a human. Like, he's going in there and he's trying his best, and yeah, he's got heightened senses, but like, he's hurting too. And I think that is another thing about this scene and the first fight scene, like I said, the last fight scene in the first episode that really stand out to me. But it also does a really good job of highlighting what they've kind of said over and over so far in the first 2 episodes, that the Murdoch family can take a hit and they'll just get back up. And I don't know. Not only is the scene awesome, I think this theme will continue throughout the rest of the show, where he's a badass, but he doesn't always fight like he is destined to win the fight. And I like that. I like that he's not portrayed as an overpowered superhero that can take on anything. Like he can, but he definitely struggles, and you see that.
Yeah, I think resilience is a big theme in this episode. I think his resilience in general is something that's it's definitely what they're trying to put at the forefront here, to talk about that whole story about his dad and getting up whenever he's hit and kind of coming home, and like, you know, him helping patch his dad up and sort of seeing that and sort of seeing and having that be what shapes him as a person. And so this fight is all about Matt's resilience and how many times he gets hit and how many times he gets back up. Not to mention, it's just an awesome fight. Like, it's just really well done, well choreographed. There is one part at the very end of the fight where Matt does this flip kick that I think was incredibly unnecessary for him to do, but he did it anyway because it was cool. But besides,
the guy was already on the ground.
Yeah, he was like already,
Right. And then he gets back up. The kick wasn't. The kick didn't even work. But I think what I just said about that, I think that actually adds to everything you just said is correct, Peaches. The struggling, the breathing, the taking a rest, something you don't see. Like, that's what sets it apart from Batman. That's how this is different from Batman. Like, you don't see that in superhero movies. You see them, you know, kind of effortlessly go from one person to another. They don't have to take a breath or lean. And
you maybe get,
but also
in other fights, like one scene like that where they're winning for the beginning of they're winning for the first 70% of the whole length of the fight, and then the bad guy hits them with two like really strong moves, and then they're like, oh, I'm about to die. Just kidding, super powerful move. This is like the whole time he's struggling.
Right, you never see him catching their breath, but also you never, in this case, he doesn't punch people and they're down, because that's not how fights work.
Right.
Like, he hit people, they get back up, he has to hit them again, they hit him back. Like, they're not, it is not, this is the punch that ends the fight. It is, they are fighting, and all of that, everything we just said is on top of just, that cinematography is amazing.
Oh yeah. It is a technically really well done sequence. Just the choreography, the fight choreography, the camera choreography. I watched it a couple times. One thing that I have learned, and hope this doesn't ruin it, his stunt double has his stunt double has a slightly bigger butt. So if you look carefully, it's a little more round. I think he's actually the same. He's Chris Evans' stunt double in the Captain America movies as well.
Is he one of the?
So it's
is it one
America's
of the
ass.
7 stunt doubles from Scott Pilgrim? No.
Lol. I got
That's a
you.
deep cut.
Lucas Lee,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Did he have 7 stunt doubles? I know there were 7 X's. Did he have 7 stunt doubles?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if
been
it
a
was
while.
a 7 exactly.
It's been a while since I've watched the movie.
the whole point of one thing that movie like hits you with over the head over and over is the number 7. So
right. Okay.
like they throw 7 into like everything.
I gotta watch that movie again. It's so good.
You know what this scene reminded me of also? It has nothing to do with the content of the scene, but the continuous camera shot. Haunting of Hill House episode.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm still mad that episode did not get an Emmy or anything. That it didn't get noticed by the Academy, because I thought that episode was fantastic.
You see, and
So far I'm like 2 for 2 on the things that I know are continuous camera shots.
And Chris, if we can go back to our older point, I think Haunting of Hill House is the perfect example of melding what you and I were talking about, even as opposites, because I think Haunting of Hill House does both. I think it does a really great job of being contained episodes, but also always telling a complete whole story.
Yes. No, I mean, that's actually like my ideal example. I'm glad it was brought up, because I didn't think of it, but that is exactly, it's like, this is an episode about this person. We're also going to learn more about the overarching story. This is an episode. Every episode is structured as a single episode. It is a self-contained story that also informs the larger story until the final episode ties it all together. And it's really, really well done.
Who wants to do a Haunting of Hill House podcast? Let's go.
Oh,
we'll point out all the ghosts.
The Haunting of Hillcast.
Yeah, baby.
And the Haunting of Bly podcast could be the sequel.
Yeah.
I could think of at least 2 people in this apartment who would be in.
Yeah.
Nice.
Same. And it's not my dog.
Ooh.
Oh man, I was really hoping Teddy, but,
Teddy has a lot of opinions on a lot of different shows. He's just not a big horror fan.
No, that's probably because dogs can sense ghosts in real life.
Yeah, he's not a big fan.
So, no.
Don't say that to me because. Why'd you say that?
Oh no, was Ivy barking at a corner earlier?
Yeah, why?
That's what Riata does. Riata just stands up, looks at a corner, and like, oof.
Don't you dare!
They've been barking. They've been barking a lot at the door. The two dogs in this house. They've been barking a lot at the door lately for no reason, and now I'm just gonna think it's a ghost. So thanks.
I'm so
At
sorry.
least the ghost is polite and is waiting at the door.
Maybe.
Ghosts don't need to use doors.
Yeah.
Or they're in the hallway, which leads to the door. So they're just looking at the door. They're looking at the hallway, but I think they're looking at the door.
Are ghosts like vampires where they can only come in if you invite them?
Nope.
No, I think they do whatever.
I think
they
they just
Okay.
live places. I think
That's
they're the
why
opposite. I think they
I-
can't leave.
I've always
Yeah.
wanted a welcome mat that said "Welcome" unless you're a vampire, just in case a welcome mat counts as an invitation.
What if it's like a snowy day though, and snow has covered the "unless you're a vampire" and it just says "welcome"?
Oh no! Well, I want a heated welcome mat then.
Okay.
What if it covers everything except for the well, and they're like, "I wonder if I'm welcome here," and they look at the mat and goes, "Well."
I guess I better stay outside just in
It
case.
covers the well.
Or it covers everything except for "you're a vampire," and then whoever sees it turns into a vampire.
It covers the well. It covers the well and the unless, and it just says, "Come, vampire." I mean,
So anyway, I love that hallway fight scene.
Yeah, that's
To
where
serve
ghosts
man.
are. The hallway.
Damn it, man.
yeah, what do you think the ghost hanging out in that hallway watching them thought? Like,
Oh, here's how we tie this in. Rosario Dawson says the line, "If you're gonna give up the ghost in my apartment, I at least want to know why you were doing it." There we go. Full circle.
Murdoch takes off his mask, tells the boy he doesn't have to be scared anymore, and carries him out as the credits roll. Hindsight, how do we think this fits into the MCU? It like sort of does a little bit, but also doesn't at all.
Yeah, I feel like we can probably drop this segment from future episodes.
I agree. So
How does it fit into the MCU? I mean, it
Yeah, right, this
technically
is-
does, but it
reference
doesn't
New
inform the movies at all. So
yeah,
it's
in all
fine.
honesty, if that's something we want to discuss, it's more at the end of the series than
sure.
here,
Yeah.
2 episodes in.
Sure,
we
we're
already
having-
talked about how it fits in the Chitauri invasion.
So we are
yeah.
trying out different formats. As we've already said, this is a test bench for the eventual Marvel shows that are going to come out on Disney Plus. So we're messing around with a few ideas. Today we're going to be talking about big takeaways that we get from these 2 episodes. So we'll start with Robbie. What's your big takeaway from the first 2
So
episodes?
we've watched so many of these superhero films with these big stakes, these epic, literally saving literally half of all the life in the universe, and that sort of stuff. So it's kind of nice. Yes, he got there with torture, and we discussed how questionable that is, but it's kind of nice just seeing a superhero film that is the story and the moment is he beat up a bunch of people to just save an abducted child who was scared and wanted to go home. And that's all there is to it. Also, my other big takeaway is that as I wrote this, I read what Zach and Eduardo said, and I feel the same as them. What peaches? That was worth it for the sound.
Z word.
Get rid of the Z word.
Try to remember.
Yeah, I liked how small a moment it was. That this is like saving a kid is heroism.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be undoing the snap. It's kind of refreshing.
My big takeaway was you've talked about it a little bit, but they kind of allude to the MCU throughout this whole thing. They kind of they hint at it, but they never actually say it. And there's always this they are always very subliminal about whether this is actually part of the MCU or not. And it's honestly kind of a shame that it's not. I was honestly really hoping, and I think Robbie's talked about this before, that during the Circles thing that the Defenders would have showed up there and at the end of Endgame, or at least at some point that we would have seen the Defenders kind of join in. But we never actually get that. And it's kind of sad because a lot of these characters specifically 3 out of the 4 of them, are portrayed really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that when Tony goes to recruit Peter Parker, clearly he's keeping tabs on all these heroes. Even if he had just sort of offhandedly mentioned the Devil of Hell's Kitchen or some of the other superpowered people in New York, is like, but you're the one.
Yeah.
Just some kind of nod to it.
Yeah, it's weird that they do the like. I guess it's not that weird, but it's like they do the offhanded references to the MCU in this show, but the MCU never really does any offhanded references to these shows.
Yeah, and
sometimes they reference Shield.
Like
in Winter Soldier, they reference Shield, right?
There are,
but Shield was already in the film.
Yeah. But it's just like that's really it. You never hear that.
Yeah. Now, Daredevil did reference Agents of Shield, sort of.
Did it?
Because Carl Creel was.
Well, he's Absorbing Man.
He's Absorbing Man, and Absorbing Man was on Agents of Shield.
Yeah. I did not know that. In seasons 1, 2, or 3.
He was in season 2, and then he came back later. I forget when exactly. But he was in several episodes of Agents of Shield.
Small world.
Did not remember that.
Yeah, and then they referenced him on Daredevil, so it was intentional.
Yeah, it feels. I don't want to say this because it might not be true. It just felt like the films didn't think the shows were good enough to be part of their universe.
Pretentious.
Yeah.
I honestly think that if anything, it might have just been logistics, because TV production and film production take wildly different amounts of time, and add in the factors of Marvel Television and Marvel Studios not being part of the same entity, even though they're both part of Marvel / part of Disney. I'm sure a lot of you have jobs where even things that should be working closely together don't work closely together very well because they're different parts of the organization.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Multiply that by 100 and you have corporate Hollywood. So the left hand never knows what the right hand is doing. That's why bringing it all under Marvel Studios' control going forward, everything is going to be a lot more tightly connected, because it will be Kevin Feige overseeing it instead of Jeff Loeb over here, Kevin Feige over there, and then every once in a while, Samuel Jackson, go do a guest spot on Agents of Shield.
I think there's also a case to be made for these. They don't want the same audience going to watch these shows to watch the Marvel movies. Think about it. You can't have Daredevil in there. Some kid's like, oh, this character, Daredevil, he's so cool. Let me go watch his show. And then somebody's eye gets scratched out and there's a knife in there,
Yeah.
So I think there's
other adult things that might happen.
Right. And so I think it makes sense that they wouldn't want those characters to be together, as much of a shame as it is. The Jessica Jones one, I don't think there is any child that should be watching Jessica Jones, because there are a lot of adult things that happen in that show that kids should not be watching.
Some adults shouldn't be watching Jessica Jones.
That's a good point.
That being said, my big takeaway is basically everything we just talked about. Same stuff. The MCU lack of crossover. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. But I also think these 2 episodes in particular, my big takeaway is just how hype these 2 episodes in particular made me for the rest of the series, because, like I said, my knowledge of Daredevil before this show was Ben Affleck's disaster of a movie. And also, again, we said this at the very beginning, but man, the intro is catchy, you guys. I love the intro to the show. It is so fun. Like, the music is really cool, and like the outline of all the different things, it ends on a cool note. I really like. I think all of the Netflix shows have a cool intro tune. Mm-hmm. But this one was the first one of them, so it was like, oh, this is neat, and it set a precedent. It's kind of like how the intro of shows like Game of Thrones really. I don't know, like show intros used to be kind of bland, and somewhere along the line someone made a really cool one. I don't know what the first one is, but people started picking that up, and then you get, all of Westeros being formed on a steampunky looking map in Game of Thrones, and then you've got, all of these Netflix series having their cool things. And I
feel
like it.
there's been like a pendulum swing of it used
Right.
to be elaborate TV intros. Let's just show the title. Let's go back
Yes.
to elaborate TV
Right.
intros now.
Yep.
I think I'm glad you said that, Peaches, because that was my reaction the first time I saw it. It's these credits are great. It has me hyped for watching this show all over again. Also, it has me sad, although my sad was not about that it's not really a part of the larger MCU. My sad was that it's, unless something happens, it's over. Like, we don't, Daredevil is done after season 3, and I know you said you didn't watch season 3. First off, you need to go watch season 3 because it might be the best season. But second, it really just sets itself up to continue. And it's not that it ends with a big cliffhanger or anything, but it definitely sets itself up for the kind of stuff that can happen in season 4, and there's not going to be one, and that's depressing.
Yeah.
I'm curious if we ever do get these characters, if they do try to reboot it, or if they try to grab the same actors and actresses and just kind of like pretend none of the adult stuff ever happened.
Yeah.
Right.
There's some conflicting things out there about whether they can or can't use those actors, and I believe they can. I think there is sort of an exclusivity agreement with Netflix that they can't necessarily do anything with those characters until a certain amount of time has passed since the last new season of each respective show. But once that time has passed, I think it's like 5 years or something. So honestly, we're coming up on it for each of them over the next few years. Then Marvel can unrestricted use those characters again. Doesn't necessarily mean that they can distribute the show. I don't know but what people I think don't understand is that distribution deals and rights holding are two different things.
I understand because I wanted a Hobbit trilogy, and then I regretted that.
Yeah. Speaking of making things darker and grittier than they need to be, R-rated Hobbit movie director's cut? Seriously? That's the thing? Anyway. But yeah, I think that eventually there is nothing stopping like once the terms expire in the next few years, there's nothing stopping them from saying, "Hey, yes, let's bring back these actors as these characters." Whether they decide that they're going to do that, I'm sure that is stuff that they're discussing, because I'm sure that they're looking to possibly use some of these characters down the line because there is great potential for them. And it could even be the sort of thing where it's like a soft reboot where it's like, okay, we won't discuss necessarily anything specific from the show, broad strokes, we won't have to go over their origins or anything again, but we can introduce... Is it Charlie Cox? I get a lot of my Charlies confused.
It's Charlie Cox, yeah.
Yeah, but we can introduce Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, have him be Daredevil, have him be established as Daredevil. We can broadly allude to some of his past adventures, but not have to get real into the weeds on him. But now he can be part of our greater universe. So I think that is an option. But I could also see them just saying, you know what, let's just start fresh, because a lot of the people, people will understand that they can sort of make the separation and say, all right, yeah, it's we're starting fresh. So I think that both options are on the table. I would love for them to connect things in the future, again, even if it's not explicitly, I need to have now watched all 3 seasons of Daredevil to understand what's happening in this movie. But just to even have the feeling of continuity, I think would be a great thing.
I'm curious what you'll think of each of the characters that they might bring in if and when you end up watching those series, because I personally really like the way Charlie Cox handles Daredevil. So I would definitely like to see him play with some of the other characters that exist in the MCU. Mm-hmm. And I am 3.5 out of 4 on all of them. And to just really quickly touch on Iron Fist, I don't know if it was bad writing or if it was bad acting. I remember personally thinking it was bad writing because I liked that actor that played Danny Rand from Game of Thrones, the small amount of Game of Thrones he was in. So I was like, I don't think this guy's a bad actor, but he's also in a wildly different setting than in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So maybe this isn't his scene, but I also thought it was more about the writing. Anyways,
in Defenders, I think it was mostly the writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I would like to see Charlie Cox Daredevil in the future, but I also know that if the MCU is going to reboot something, they're going to do a good job, and they're gonna cast a good Daredevil, no matter who it is.
I think as far as Iron Fist is concerned, I think they are recasting Iron Fist, but they're recasting him as Shang-Chi, and I think that is their writing of that ship, because I think they realized they made a mistake there. I think there were a lot of people calling for an Asian actor to play Iron Fist originally.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people upset that they were taking this character that, you know, in a large part appropriated a lot of that culture and then kept him as sort of a white-centric story, this sort of, you know, Tom Cruise Last Samurai type of...
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, and I'm not on the other side of this argument, to be fair, Iron Fist's character is a white dude that knows Kung Fu, but they could have chosen to take a different route and use a different character instead of gentrifying.
Well, I think that's people's plight, is that even though it is a white character, that doesn't necessarily make it a good thing that it is a white character.
Right.
Yeah. Make him an Asian American character.
Absolutely.
Who does not necessarily have any real connection to his culture. You can tell the exact same story, basically, as having a white dude do it. But with an added wrinkle of, maybe someone connecting to, I mean, I don't know if Kunlun, I know Kunlun is fictional, but if you're putting it in China or Japan, I'm not sure where Kunlun is supposed to be in Asia, if it has an actual, like, analog. But have it be, him now reconnecting with his heritage in a way that he never had before. And I think that's fertile ground for storytelling, where, you could still have him be the rich American guy. It just happens to be a rich Asian American guy instead of a white guy who is like, and I am the greatest master of Kung Fu in the world. It's like...
and he wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, that was a lie.
Yeah.
I think we circle back to the top of the episode when we talk about Iron Fist with Chadwick Boseman and Black Panther, and how groundbreaking and stage setting that was for all their cultures to then seek their representation on the big screen. And I think the actor that's playing Shang-Chi, I'm not sure his name. One of you guys will look it up for me.
I'll look it up for you. Yeah, I just saw his...
He posted a tweet that was basically like, there would be no Shang-Chi.
Simu Liu?
Yes. He said there would be no Shang-Chi without Chadwick Boseman, because there would be no Shang-Chi without Black Panther. Those things don't exist without the other, which gets me excited for any Hispanic superheroes that might come up, and it gets, anybody who wants to see themselves on screen excited. So once again, thank you, Chadwick Boseman. Chris, what was your big takeaway from the first two episodes? And this is really interesting because this is your first watch, so it better be good.
Yeah. It's something we actually talked about a little bit earlier. I said Marvel, but for grown-ups. I mean, it is very much leaning into we're the MCU, we're Marvel, but we are going to be violent and we're going to deal with mature themes. And my big takeaway is that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know I'm saying it tongue-in-cheek. Not necessarily a bad thing. Also not automatically a good thing, but I like it so far.
Well, and I think it's important because that's exactly how the comics are, right? Like, Marvel Comics as a whole isn't just every single comic is in this theme. Marvel Comics these are dark comics, and these are, comics about a spider pig, and these are comics about, like, more your traditional comic stories, and they sort of are well into that wide spectrum. So it is good to see them being represented like that in media as well.
Yeah, I love it, because I think that it's even if they don't connect 1-to-1. It's all part of the same universe, and that is fine. That, a high school comedy like Spider-Man versus, a really gritty crime story like Daredevil, in the comics, they all exist. Real life, they all exist. There are people in real life who are living a much grittier life than I, who am working from home and recording a podcast with my buddies, but we're all part of the same world. So why shouldn't that be that way in the stories? Not every story has to be part of the same tone to be part of the same universe.
Well said. Well, that's going to do it for our first experiment. The first 2 episodes of Daredevil are in the books. Join us the next episode where we talk about episodes 2 and 3 of Daredevil.
Episodes 3 and 4.
Episodes 3 and 4 of Daredevil.
We like that hallway fight so much.
We're actually going to start at the hallway scene again and just go from there.
Okay, actually, I'm going to tell you why I watched that fight scene twice is because apparently it was queued up to exactly the fight scene when I started it on Netflix today. And I was like, oh, I forgot this was the beginning of the episode. And the credits rolled. I go, oh, no, I guess it was the end of the episode. Let me watch it again.
But yes, join us next week as we watch, or next episode. I don't know if it's going to be next week. Join us next episode as we watch episodes 3 and 4 of Daredevil. Once again, thank you everybody for listening to the show, for taking the time to listen. We are about to hit 5,000 downloads of Assembly Required and MCU Retrospective, which is insane. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you would like to email the show, you can email the show assemblyrequiredcast@gmail.com. Find the show at assemblycast on Twitter. You can find these fellas, PhilKid3, GatorSax2010, D_Peaches, ABCD Eduardo 1 for myself. That's going to do it for myself, for Robbie, for Chris, for Peaches. Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever?